Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the FCC's Hurricane Resiliency Roundtable. I'm glad you're all here. It's good to see you in person. I'm glad you could make it, and welcome to our humble home. And for everyone joining online, it's great to see you as well, tuning in the Monday morning after the 4th of July long weekend, so it's great to have you. We're delighted to have you all join us. If you haven't seen it yet, there's agendas on the table coming in. And I just want to note that this event is being live streamed and recorded, and there's going to be a copy of the webcast placed in the docket of the Resilient Networks and new Part 4 of the Commission's Rules Concerning Disruptions to Communications. So welcome. I'm pleased to introduce FCC Chairman Brendan Carr to offer opening remarks. Chairman Carr.
Thanks so much. Good to see you all today. It's so good to see so many familiar faces. Obviously, I want to start with a recognition of the power and the tragedy that can come from natural disasters, including what we saw the last couple of days in Texas. Just truly heartbreaking stories. Incredibly grateful for the first responders that are out there. There's been unbelievable stories already of the U.S. Coast Guard performing a tremendous number of rescues, of camp counselors, stepping up, just kids, helping other kids. So my heart goes out to everyone that's affected by that. The FCC obviously is monitoring the situation from a communications perspective. The good news is we're not seeing any sort of significant widespread communications issues coming from that, but we are monitoring and we stand ready to support and assist in any way that we can. I want to thank President Trump and Secretary Noem for all the work that they're doing out there right now. It's really good to see the response that's taking place in a terrible situation. For our part, I want to thank you all for joining us. Obviously, we're doing this FCC Public Safety Bureau Roundtable on hurricane resiliency as we head into another hurricane season. We thought this was an opportune time to do it. The season is just getting underway, and the FCC is focused on making sure that our communications providers have all the best practices in place, and that our 911 call operators are able to coordinate recovery efforts. After all, calls to 911 always have to go through. We want to make sure that obviously no network ever goes down, but that the 911 network is the most resilient one that's out there. We have to make sure these calls always go through. As I said, as I sort of walked into the room, I saw a lot of familiar faces from my time both here in D.C. and importantly outside the Beltway. I saw Captain Jack Vernado, 911 director for Louisiana, Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office. Back in 2021, I had the chance to visit with the 911 call center down there, travel to Louisiana, an area that was hit hard by Hurricane Ida. Captain Vernado and a few others rode out the storm at their reinforced 911 call center, which I remember at the time he was walking us around. He said it swayed, it creaked, it even leaked a little under the pressure of 100-mile-per-hour winds. That call center maintained their internet connection during the entire storm, even though they lost telephone service for a time. Now, on my first official trip as chairman of the FCC, I visited parts of North Carolina that had been hard hit by Hurricane Helene. I remember, again, visiting a 911 call center on that trip. I met with one of the call takers, Jessica. She told me that she worked there in Rutherford County and she handled a massive surge in calls during the peak of the storm. Normally, her team handles about 410 calls a day. But at the peak of Hurricane Helene, that spiked to over 2,400 calls for help. And you got to remember, when you're looking at a community like Rutherford County and folks that are working in these 911 call centers, they're not taking calls from strangers. They're taking calls from family members, they're taking calls from neighbors, and they stayed there on the job, making sure that people got the help that they needed. I also had a chance on that visit to speak with first responders like Asheville Assistant Fire Chief Jeremy Knighton, who led heroic rescue and recovery efforts. I visited telecom workers in the hard-hit Chimney Rock and Lake Lure area, who quickly responded to restore communications in difficult situations. I talked with one telecom worker who, when flooding, took out miles and miles of connections between two main cities. He actually got in a kayak and pulled a new fiber strand down the river to connect two communities that had been completely taken off the communications grid. Back in 2018, before that, I visited the Florida Panhandle in the aftermath of another devastating storm, Hurricane Michael. In the immediate aftermath of that storm, thousands of power companies and crews rushed into the area to help. Contractors worked hard to restore communications as well. When you look back at all these storms that we've seen over the last several years, there's a couple patterns that emerge. It used to be historically that the singular most important thing after a storm was to restore power. And everything needed to give way to restoring power communications. Increasingly, obviously, connectivity is of paramount importance. And so now we have to balance the need to restore power and the need to restore communications, which means you're going to get crews coming from different jurisdictions, different areas that don't know each other, and they're all focused on the job ahead of them. And that's part of what we want to do with this type of roundtable and other events that the FCC is holding, is to make sure that we're properly coordinated, everything from power to communications to 911 responders as well. The other pattern that you'll see if you look at restoration is usually the communications networks survive pretty well these last few storms in the days or hours after a storm. But then you see what we call a sawtooth pattern of restoration efforts. There'll be some restoration of service, then we'll lose service. There'll be some restoration, then we'll lose service. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is, commercial power struggling in the long term. Two, you'll get fiber cuts along the way. As again, people are trying to clear roads so that emergency workers can come in. They're just going to be, removing and cutting debris, and they don't realize that there's still a fiber strand in there that's still working. Or a power company that comes in to replace a pole could end up accidentally disrupting a communications line that's in there. And so the FCC has been working for years to try to improve collaboration. I think we're getting there. But I think events like this are going to prove to be very, very important as we head into this next round of storms to make sure that we're all coordinated. We're doing a lot at the FCC as well. We've developed and mandated a mandatory disaster response initiative, or MDRI, as we call it. And this is designed to encourage coordination and support disaster recovery efforts. This approach that we have requires facilities-based mobile wireless providers to provide reasonable roaming under disaster arrangements, to foster mutual aid during emergencies, to work with local governments to enhance municipal preparedness and restoration, develop a consumer readiness checklist to increase consumer readiness ahead of storms, and improve awareness and communications on service and restoration status through our disaster reporting system called DOORS. However, collaboration between communications, electric power, and emergency management officials continues to be critical to ensure that we get the best possible outcome in these scenarios. And that's why we're gathered here, to share best practices, apply lessons learned, and identify next steps to continue to plan and prepare for the future. So again, I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you for your exemplary efforts. Thank you to the staff, the Public Safety Bureau that always answers the call in emergencies. I think this is going to be a very important roundtable as we head into this next hurricane season. Again, as we were reminded over these past couple of days, disaster can strike at any time. We have to have robust, resilient communications networks. So I want to thank you all again. Thank you for participating. I know you have very busy day jobs and you're taking this on in addition to that. So again, I want to express my thanks and appreciation. Look forward to this group, and we'll continue to stay focused to make sure that we keep communications up and running during any disaster that hits. So thanks again. Look forward to joining with you all today. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman Carr. Next, I'd like to introduce Zenji, the Acting Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Zenji.
Good morning, and welcome to the FCC's Hurricane Season Resiliency Roundtable. And right off the top, I want to echo the chairman's words about the devastation that is happening here in central Texas and Kerr County. It is truly devastating, and as public safety officials and public servants, we know how hard it can be on communities. Our hearts go out to those folks in that territory. We're honored, though, today to bring together really a distinguished group of experts today from the communications, the power, and the emergency management sectors who, when disaster strikes, are really at the front lines when it comes to preparedness and response. Over the course of 3 panel discussions, we'll explore how these sectors prepare for and respond to major disasters, how they coordinate with each other, and how we can apply lessons learned from past events to improve resilience and readiness going forward. Why is this so critical? Because communications and power isn't just services, it's a lifeline. When a hurricane strikes, they help keep first responders connected and communities safe. And because we're so interconnected, we must strengthen both to stay ready and resilient. We're a month into hurricane season, and today's conversation couldn't be more important and timely. Take Hurricane Helene, for example. Just last year, this Category 4 storm tore through the southeast, devastating Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. With winds of over 100 miles per hour, flooding of up to 4 feet, and more than 2,000 landslides, Helene knocked out power and communication for millions. Some of the hardest hit counties, like those in western North Carolina, were left physically and technologically isolated. But amid that destruction, we saw inspiring examples of collaboration and resilience. Telecom and power companies joined forces to restore vital services. They worked alongside local state officials to prioritize recovery efforts, recognizing that restoring one services sector often depended on the other. And beyond the formal coordination, there were grassroots efforts as well that made a real difference. Just 1 week after the storm, volunteers at the Southwest Virginia 4-H Center hosted 140 power line workers, providing them with meals, shelter, and laundry. Each morning, starting at 3 a.m., volunteers cooked 420 eggs, 280 biscuits, and 23 pots of coffee. That's a breakfast for champions. It was a powerful reminder that in the face of disaster, everyone can make a difference, and that community spirit and coordination go hand in hand. At the FCC, we did our part too. We stood up the FCC incident management team that coordinated on a daily basis with FEMA Region 4, state and county 911 and emergency management officials and leaders, as well as state and local broadcasters. We activated the disaster information reporting system as well as the mandatory disaster response initiative. And we deployed our own communications survey teams, what I liken to our own FCC hurricane hunters, if you will. These guys went out there to assess conditions and support recovery in the hardest hit areas. Due to the severity of damage to North Carolina's roads and access infrastructure, this was also the first time that FCC teams, in collaboration with the Civil Air Patrol, conducted airborne assessments of cellular service. It's quite remarkable. Today's panel will highlight the collaborative events between communications providers, utilities, and emergency management officials. These aren't just technical discussions, they go to the heart of our mission, keeping people safe by keeping them connected. Let's use today's forum to share ideas, lessons, and best practices. And most of all, let's keep in mind the communities we serve and the lives that depend on our readiness and resilience. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome John O'Connor from our Operations and Emergency Management Division, who will introduce the first panel. John.
First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for joining us today. And you don't want to hear me, you want to hear the panelists, so we'll just jump right into this. As we heard, but as we'd like to understand, in any disaster, comms and power get hit, communications disruptions to a hurricane can have a variety of impacts. They include direct damage to communications facilities, or loss of the connectivity, or simply have loss of power and they're not able to run. On the side of our commercial power partners, some of the same. They can experience impact to generation, transport, or distribution into the neighborhoods. I think the end result for both of them is comms requires power to run. Power requires communications to be able to manage the network and coordinate the restoration of that network. So we look to explore those today for a variety of perspectives. Those that have lived it in public safety as state level, running communications, a variety of different disciplines, and also from power. So I welcome all the folks coming together to do that. One thing I'd like to sort of just emphasize, or at least give a little perspective on scale. When we had Hurricane Helene, we had our disaster information reporting system up, and at one point in time it was reporting 3,600 cell sites were out of service due to lack of power. And then a number of those were also, cell sites were running on temporary generators at those particular sites. And so if we had lost those, that number of 3,600 would have been above 5,000. So you can see the scale of dependencies that we would have between power and comms, and how that would go forward. And so unfortunately during a disaster, there's going to be impacts regardless of how much work and how bulletproof we try to make it. And then you're going to experience things that you never experienced before, and we'll hear some of that as we go around the panel today. All right, with that, for me, I'd like to give the panelists an actual opportunity to introduce themselves. Red button to come online, first name, organization, and a little bit of history, and then we'll come around for the first question after we do that. So.
All right, thank you. Jack Vornado, I'm the captain and 911 director at Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office. And as the chairman said, I've been in communications for 35 years and been working at 911 centers all across South Louisiana. And I also represent the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials International as the first vice president.
Good morning. Thank you again to the commissioner and commission for having us here and convening today's conversation. Very important, very timely. Drew Preston with Duke Energy. We provide power to approximately 10 million customers across 7 states, and excited to be here representing the tens of thousands of personnel and teammates who respond in these moments.
Hey, good morning. I'm Kevin Powell. I'm with Verizon Wireless. I'm the Associate Vice President for Network Operations and Engineering for the state of Florida. I've been in the wireless industry for over 35 years. I've got experience from Hurricane Katrina all the way up to Hurricane Milton. Also, I would like to thank the Commission for hosting this roundtable. I think it's an important topic. And it's timely with us going into the season, and especially with just the storms that everybody spoke about earlier. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Morris. I am Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at NCTA. We represent cable operators and cable programmers, provide a wide variety of services, including broadband, video, and voice services. Our members work very hard, invest a lot of time and effort in keeping those networks operational before, during, and after emergency situations. I'm also, on behalf of NCTA, for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been very involved in the Cross-Sector Resiliency Forum, which is an industry group that we created that includes most of the major trade associations for communications providers, both wireline and mobile, as well as electric. Many of the larger companies are also very involved, and the whole focus of that group has been to work on and discuss collaboration across the sectors. We've invested time and effort in that because we all know how important it is to work together in these disaster situations, and I think we do a really good job of that, but we we're sort of constantly engaged in trying to do even better. So.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Greg Hauser, North Carolina Division of Emergency Management. My role is the statewide interoperability coordinator, and for those that don't know, there are one SWIC in each state and each U.S. territory in the District of Columbia. So it is my job to prepare North Carolina for its worst days and react to those issues that come up where first responder communications processes are degraded due to storms or no-notice events. So I'm honored to be here, and I hope to share some lessons learned from Hurricane Helene. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Steve George, Executive Vice President of Engineering for iHeartMedia. So currently I oversee technical teams that are responsible for our over 800 AM and FM radio stations across the country. So as part of that, I lead teams that are responsible for prepping for disasters and dealing with the aftermath. And previous to that job, I've spent a good part of the past 20 years in all sorts of facets for disaster response for iHeartMedia, and I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of dedicated broadcast engineers, both within iHeart and the broadcast industry of a whole, that really take a lot of pride and move heaven and earth to make sure that our AM and FM infrastructure is prepared and ready to go so that during disasters like hurricanes, we remain on the air and remain really resilient and that voice to the public during the storm and then immediately after the storm when other forms of communication may be hampered, to get out information from our emergency management partners and others and keep people informed. So excited today to talk about the common challenges we have with keeping that infrastructure going and restoring that infrastructure during these big natural disaster events.
Good morning. I'm Shirley Bloomfield. I'm the CEO of NGCA, the Rural Broadband Association. We represent 850 community-based providers across the country, about 35% of the landmass. So when weather hits, it's usually hitting somewhere where our folks are, including in Hill Country this weekend. I also sit on the board for CERC as an independent director, so I have a foot in the power camp as well. And that is why I've already learned so much this morning, just that first hour talking to everybody around these tables. But the importance of coordination between the power industry and the communications industry, and very much looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. So season has kicked off. We are 3 named storms in the Atlantic, 6 in the Pacific already. Thankfully, we haven't had to marshal a large response for those yet. But we do want to flash back and kind of look at the 2024 hurricane season. What were some of our lessons learned? What are some of our concerns? Some of those things that we're going to project into the 2025 season. Since we're a comms heavy panel here, we're going to let our guests from Power go first, take first bite of the apple. Jack will come to you second, and then start jumping around that. And to the panelists, as always, this is better as a conversation rather than a Q&A, so don't be shy and jump in and add color commentary as we go forward.
Thanks, John. So looking back to last season, one of the things that definitely we learned was just the scale and scope of damage. You heard the chairman mention it earlier. I mean, I heard 30-year, 40-year veterans of the company say, you know, we've never seen devastation like this, right? So just the scope and scale. I'm a native Floridian. I grew up with hurricanes. But just the damage was stuff that we really haven't seen that level before. And then sort of takeaways, debris, just the amount of debris, traffic, I think is something also that probably collectively impacts us. So elected officials rushing to reopen some of these areas and just inviting pretty much every onlooker in the state seemingly to come have a peek. Delays our abilities to get in there quicker. So that was sort of an immediate, I think, takeaway.
Thank you. Public safety perspective?
Well, I think as public safety, the chairman mentioned 911 calls have to go through. And that doesn't mean that just our 911 system is up. It also means that the providers are able to provide the necessary connectivity from the public to 911. And the scope of damage just from, and I'll speak from Hurricane Ida and then going to North Carolina for Helene, knowing the massive scale of damage for the power systems, coordination with local and state assets and getting access to these critical sites for restoration is just very important. And then secondly, I would say that we are training and we're doing a better job of it, but we've still got work to do of training our local public works, fire, law enforcement that are going in and cleaning these roads of not damaging the infrastructure as we're doing this, and then our debris cleaners coming in. That's where the chairman said that sawtooth, seeing that, that's one of the real critical areas that I see there.
Yeah, thanks, Captain. I think you're right on. I think from the approach from North Carolina that we saw last year, the focus really became clear that the emergency communications ecosystem has to be in place before we start taking those reactive measures. So, the government to government lane of communicating, the government to public, the public to government, and then that public to public communications lane, we really have to be methodical, and ultimately we have to put a team of our friends together to react to those things. That includes power, that includes our friends in the media, the public broadcastings, all of those areas. It's very, very important before you even start to think about where to start. I think, to your point earlier, the devastation, if it is so overwhelming. At one time, I believe we had 22 counties in western North Carolina that were significant or catastrophic communications and energy infrastructure damage. So you really have to be, we really took a methodical approach, got our friends together, started collaborating, and then just get into the street and see what we can find. And ultimately, it's that collaboration that starts to bring those lanes of the ecosystem back in order. So.
Yeah, and so much of that has to be done prior to building those relationships, prior to the disasters. If we don't build those relationships and know who to call and who our friends are, we're going to be behind the 8 ball in serving our public.
Yeah, I mean,
would-
just
Okay.
to echo what, these guys are saying, it's really a full-time job, right? You have to, at all times, sort of have everyone sort of know who, in each location, like know who their counterparts are, be able to contact them, have those relationships in place, and then when the storm is coming or a situation hits, then it's, we have to figure out, we have to get all those people sort of in the room, whether it's like literally a room or a virtual room, but make sure everyone is on the same page, hearing the same messages. We all are depending on each other. Like we can't get our cable networks back without the local government clearing the streets, without the electric company getting the poles back up. And we all know that. Like, we each depend on each other, and we know that. So I think these relationships exist. They've existed for a while, but I think just the last few years, it's definitely sort of crystallized for everybody what a joint effort this is. And then it's just in each location figuring out how it works best, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all necessarily. Different local governments or different state governments may have different preferences as to how to do things, but everybody needs to know sort of, in this place, this is how we do it, and this is who we do it with, and that's when it works best.
And I was just going to jump in and say, I literally reached out to a bunch of my providers to say, all right, what worked, what didn't work. And it's so interesting because those that have those long-term relationships, I've said, well, are you exchanging phone numbers before? Are you exchanging contact information? Some of them are like, well, they were in my wedding, or they, these are small towns, which is terrific. But I also think the concern is, I look at somebody like Duke Energy and I think, well, you've got a lot of small communication providers in your footprint, but you might only be thinking about Verizon. And how do you make sure you're sharing that GIS information, you're sharing that contact information? And then one of the things that, talking to my companies, Bullock down in Georgia, talking about how do you work together to prioritize, what is going to be our priority recovery? Is it going to be that fiber hut or that cell tower, or that can only be reached by an ATV, and making sure that you're kind of coordinating in advance that as the power comes up, how are you working together on those priorities? So I think, when I was thinking about all of the different lessons learned, communications rises to the top. And to your point, Steve, before the storm hits, what are you doing planning before? Do your emergency officials know to reach out to you? What kind of relationship have you established? So that really seems to be the cornerstone.
I want to jump in real quick. Just one note from a higher level is that one of my big takeaways from last year was thinking more broadly about how a storm impacts different parts of the country and how that response is significantly different in the mountainous areas of North Carolina versus, I don't want to say we've gotten good at responding to storms right along the Gulf Coast of Florida and Louisiana, but I think we learned some important lessons about some significant differences in terms of the effort that it takes to respond to, mountain roads that are covered in trees and partially washed away and with propane up to this tower site outside of Asheville compared to relatively flat land and kind of more routine challenges after hurricanes along the Gulf Coast. So that was an eye-opening experience for me. And as we move forward, definitely thinking about, all right, what are the impacts beyond where it's coming ashore, and how do we think about those larger impacts as it moves inland?
Yeah, I just want to echo what everybody has said here as well, that, we've got to take advantage of the blue sky time. When we've got blue skies, we've got to have these meetings and be able to get together and know the process between our EOCs, between the organizations, what are the priorities. From a wireless perspective, what our biggest priority is to make sure we're supporting search and rescue and our first responders. We want to make sure that they've got the comms that they need to perform their job after devastation like we saw last year with Helene in the Carolinas. From a wireless perspective, what impacted us the most is, it goes along with what we saw in the Carolinas, the devastation with mountains and roads being washed out, the loss of fiber. During the storm, the fiber cuts that we would see or the damage that would be done to a switching facility, to storm recovery, that soil effect that we saw or talked about with, fiber being cut as debris being cleared, poles being set, roads being bulldozed, and fiber being cut. So being able to know where that database is at, where the fiber is at, what's been effective over the past few years, especially since Hurricane Michael. We've had public announcements, EOC, state and local EOCs go out and publicly announce or put out information of don't cut fiber. Look out for your fiber, look out for the cables, don't cut that. And it has significantly decreased that impact from what we saw back with Hurricane Michael. But there's still a lot to be done there. I mentioned fiber. The other issue, power. We do have a lot of issues when we do lose power, but from a comms perspective and from a wireless perspective, we've got a high rate of generators, permanent generators at our sites. So we can still recover the network and keep the network running from a generator standpoint and having that emergency power on site, 90% plus of our sites, but it's accessing those sites to refuel those generators and be able to get to the tanker trucks out there or whatever we need to get the propane or the diesel fuel out to those locations to keep those cellular sites up. The other thing I want to add there is, along with that access, we've taken advantage in the past of coordinating with our power partners, the power companies, and how do we prioritize which sites do we go to? What sites are important to us? What sites are important to them? From a staging standpoint, for power companies, they have these massive fields of bucket trucks that are coming in, crews that are coming in. How do we support the comms for that influx of capacity that's needed? Along the same lines, they're important substations. Which substations do we need to make sure we have good comms at? Where can we do a backup? Have a backup plan if we lose comms at that substation, so they've got a good view into the network. In reverse, for them, we got to share information, and we do this. We share information with them of, here's power meters for our essential hubs. Here's power meters for our hub or our switch locations. Please monitor those and make sure these sites stay up. These are critical. If we lose this location, we could lose the west coast of Florida. Whatever that situation could be, we want to make sure we're communicating that between organizations. So again, back to the blue skies, preparation. We've got to make sure we're practicing, drills with each other. And the drills could be as simple as, hey, who's my POC? Who's my contact? What's your process for me to escalate or provide information or get information from? And that needs to work both ways through all the EOCs.
I'll add this one thing there. One of the things that would benefit us at the local and probably the state government too is some type of a GIS type of outage reporting for telecoms. We see that a lot of times with our power companies, but we don't have that access that we could then prioritize at the local level, the ability to get into those areas quickly and restore those types of services. But getting into that, we don't know what those power outages are, and then we can't communicate through the legacy media to be able to say, hey, look, we're here, we need help. They can't get to us because of that. Social media doesn't help us because they can't get online. We then rely on the FM and AM radio stations to be able to do that.
So that is one of the important benefits we provide. After Helene, for example, we went multiple weeks, just 24/7, taking nothing but phone calls from people in the area and then relaying that emergency info. And that is one of the things as radio and broadcasters in general we take extremely seriously during the storm and immediately after. To circle back on one of the challenges that we face behind the scenes on the infrastructure side on the broadcast, related back to power, is just all of the different power organizations that we work with. And North Carolina is a good example in that Duke Energy is certainly the big provider in the area, but we were scattered across multiple rural electric cooperatives all the way down into South Carolina and Georgia as well. And so one of our challenges is, Duke Energy certainly has the capacity to deal with us and PR to give us updates on, what plans are to restore that. But truth be told, some of these electric co-ops are small operations, and it's difficult to find information about, how long do we need to keep this FM site on generator? Is it 5 days? Is it 4 weeks? And so that really is one of our challenges once the storm passes, is that triage planning of how long do we have to keep these sites alive, and how do we get cohesive information from all of these different partners on what that restoration progress looks like.
Yeah, so I do want to echo Captain's point in everything that's being said. I think having a local emergency management coordinator or police chief, fire chief understand what critical infrastructure is in their town or city. I grew up in a town of 1,700 people, and if I knew that bricked up building with no windows would be the source of us losing communications during a disaster, I would put a priority on that. I think we missed the mark a little bit at the higher levels of planning when we should really dig in deep and say, hey, this one right here, you should really protect this. If there's something to be sandbagged, you should sandbag this building because it will give you that extra time to communicate, come up with your plans, and really solidify those levels of communications from the local to the regional to the state to the federal. If we have that all in place, it's going to benefit. I think also coordination is happening. Coordination happened during Hurricane Helene at multiple different levels of government. So there was local emergency operations centers working, there was state emergency operations centers working, there was federal coordination centers working, there were business, both energy and telecom emergency operations centers working. I think we have to trust each other a little bit more, that things are being done. I personally fielded a lot of calls of, hey, do you know this? Yes. I think that collaboration across industry, my partners in Emergency Support Function 12 within North Carolina Emergency Management, we talk every single day. If I come to my friends over there in that room and say, we have some co-ops that need to get into their locations, they're going to fight whatever they can do to get access to those locations for you. So there has to be that trust to say, if you tell us where the important pieces are at the local level, we'll probably already know. And then if something really bad happens in those areas, we're probably going to know to get access to those and get fuel to those. So I think rather than an approach of if it's really bad, maybe the approach should be, well, it's a beautiful day today. Let's go to small town North Carolina and have a discussion. So, thank you.
And I do want to compliment both Jack and Greg, because having community-based providers in your areas during these emergencies really have nothing but good things to say about the coordination on the ground. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting in terms of lessons learned from planners down in Georgia that they shared is they did a lot of ride-alongs with their electric counterparts. So getting the two entities in the truck, get that telecom person in there to be like, all right, let's do a ride-along. Let's kind of see. They even did boat-alongs, when they're in the flooding situation, being able to kind of identify the facilities that are out there, and doing some of that ability to coordinate, I think is incredibly important. And the other thing that they shared, when you think about some of that recovery effort and who's allowed on the roads, and everybody's coming out to see the disaster, having a communications branded truck also be allowed to be on the road is incredibly helpful. So again, understanding you've got to be mindful about who's on the road, but what those telecom crews can be doing to support the power industry is really important. And Steve, I would just, one final note, you mentioned all those little co-ops. That is why it is so incredibly important that they be included in this discussion, because it is really important. Otherwise, you've got this Swiss cheese effect all over the place. So thinking about, where that gets gathered, how that gets harnessed, I think as IBRs come online, that's going to get a little bit trickier. But I think right now you've got a really good idea of who are those different providers. And I'm going to steal Kevin Blue Sky, because I think that it's all about that, the tabletops, that how do we plan now? How do we share information now?
I would agree. I mean, it's a 365-day effort for us. It's not like we start getting ready for storm season a month before storm season. Yeah. So, we're collaborating with a number of stakeholders throughout the year, and I think this is an area where, we're always working towards perfection, right? And it's the communications piece, I think, where we can still make progress, even as a company, certainly as an industry and cross-sector. I would also echo and just appreciation for our collaboration with our EOCs. I mean, we are embedded. We literally put people in there 24 hours a day at the state and county level in our EOCs, and our partnership with our emergency law enforcement personnel, particularly fire, as we go into these neighbors. I mean, we are literally truck next to fire trucks as we re-energize these neighborhoods. There's structural damage, so having fire right there with us, able to put these structures out when fires do occur as we re-energize. So it's just a critical time saver and a huge piece of that.
Yeah, Drew, to add on to that, that's where, we got to make sure an area is safe for us to come into from a power perspective, and we want to follow in from a comms perspective as well. We're getting the road clear. We're making sure it's safe from a power perspective. There's not live power lines on the ground, and we're following in to be able to access a cellular site at that time as well to do any type of recovery. I do want to go back to the comment of you've got a lot of rural power companies out there that we're dealing with. That's the same thing for the comm side too. We've got a lot of rural telco companies out there that that may not be equipped resource-wise to be able to respond to the devastation that we saw with Helena in rural areas of North Carolina or parts of Florida. The comment was made earlier, Florida, I will say we've gotten good at it. We've been hit a lot. Fortunately or unfortunately, we've had a lot of practice. So I think we've learned a lot from those, but being able to support the resources that have to come in, not only from a wireless perspective, from a power perspective, and then that third-party rural telecom, be able to provide hotel housing, logistics on that front, being able to feed these folks and have a living quarters for them to be able to get some rest as they're pulling a 12-hour day out there trying to recover the network. So, I think those are some critical things that we need to look at, not maybe necessarily as an industry, but as across industries of how do we house some of the folks that are coming in. If we do it as telecom, how do we manage those resources to be able to help the smaller providers out there that don't have the resources out there to get that fiber replaced? that's impacting so many sites in a rural area.
So you raise an interesting point, and I've always marveled at the electric industry has kind of that mutual aid arrangement, and we don't really see anything comparable in the communications. And we've often thought about, we have 850 providers. Is there something that we do? Now, some of it happens organically, like with Helene. I had co-ops coming from all over North Carolina and Tennessee to come in, and teams that were the finance department were doing their laundry every morning and cooking all of the breakfast and finding places for them to sleep in the warehouse. But the communication side does not have that established mutual aid kind of format that I've always thought would be really intriguing. I think, again, community-based providers tend to kind of come together and help their own, but I think something more formalized could ensure, to your point, Kevin, that, what are the resources? Helene, my company, my co-op Skyline was literally taking fiber and tying it into down bridges to create that connectivity. They were actually helping the electric co-ops splice the fiber because most electric co-ops actually outsource that task. So it was the telcos working with the electrics to kind of help them do some of the skills that they don't normally have in-house. But again, just thinking about that bigger picture, I think there's something there.
Sure, and even before going back to blue skies, that's where we're trying to design the network. Where do we have that diverse routing? How do we get the fiber buried where it makes sense and it's cost effective, and being able to do the right thing in certain areas to make the network more resilient. I think all of us are trying to do that day in and day out and make the network more reliable. Coastal hardening, a huge project of taking sites that are on the coast that are prone for flooding, elevating those, getting them off the ground, making sure they do have the proper diversity when it comes to fiber. But going back to the access and the debris and everything that's in the road, I think that a part of the collaboration that we do need to look at is we had an example of this in Florida when Hurricane Ian hit down in Fort Myers, and the barrier islands out there, many of the bridges to access those islands were destroyed, and we could not get out to those residents or people that decided to stay. But there were barges. And we, through EOCs and different communications through the different EOCs, hey, we have a barge going out there. All right, well, we can take a mobile asset and put it on that barge and get it out to the island so that we can start providing communications out at that island. So that's another part that I think we can do better at collaborating on what resources we have out there to get through areas that are impacted for access and working through those access issues.
I will second that. That is one of our challenges with AM and FM infrastructure is we have towers on top of mountains or other places that can be difficult to get to in times of emergency, and we don't have a cohesive, get in free card for our staff that we bring in. For example, with Helene, we brought people up from Atlanta, we brought people in from Charlotte. We certainly had our people within Asheville that had local contacts, but they were busy, running out and gathering the news or on the air or dealing with their houses. And so we're bringing in all of these extra people that are going out to fix the infrastructure. And so, we don't have that local connection as they come into town. And so one of the difficult things is how do we get past this roadblock, or how do we get past, whatever the impediment is. So it would be nice to be able to coordinate on a system that's unified across, local municipalities and across states as well. So it doesn't matter if we're going to Florida or Louisiana or North Carolina. We have a way from our centralized disaster teams to get those people in where they need to go.
And I can comment on that firsthand experience. I think there are those informal relationships in place. Maybe not formalized, but they are there. And I saw it firsthand in my office. We had T-Mobile, AT&T, FirstNet, Verizon, North Carolina Association of Broadcasters. We were there. And I think it's important to understand that from our perspective, trying to figure out kind of how to go about this with something so massive, there is great need everywhere, and it seemed like all the time. So I think to answer address your concern, I think there's a point of time for which the execution of a plan, it needs that time to evolve. And I think the information flow in and out is important, which is why comms is so important. Because when there is no communications and there is no understanding of what the need is, you have to back up a little bit, try and put the operational picture together, and then in order to react appropriately. Because our challenge was we didn't want to misassign resources where they would be needed more to something that we could see and find. So, and I specifically remember talking to one of my teammates who we assigned fuel and access, Dale. He was with the Office of EMS, North Carolina OEMS. We said, Dale, if you see a tower with a blinking light on it on a mountaintop, your job is to get to it, keep it fueled, and keep it on the air, regardless of what it is. And that was the message we got out to our local emergency managers to say, we are coming. We are working it. We had helicopters. We had DOT, which was a representative in a different room. We're saying, these are our priorities. And I distinctly remember a conversation, I believe it was Blue Ridge Radio, I think, but saying, this is pretty much it. AM radio is the only thing that's on the air, and it is vital that we get to it and fuel it. So I think there are many informal things that happen everywhere during something as catastrophic as Helene. So, and I appreciate that.
So one of the interesting things in Shirley's comment about mutual aid triggered it is one difference between comms and electric is a lot of us compete with each other, a lot of the companies, and I think when we're in the sort of disaster context, people are pretty good about putting that aside and working together. But I think every company has this instinct, particularly when we're talking about the details of our networks, is I don't really like to tell my competitors the details about my network. And so I think we've all sort of overcome that to a point. I think, mutual aid requires a lot of trust in people, and so I think there's more progress we can make, and it's the same with, we've heard from a few people, the importance of sort of sharing your priorities with everybody, and that's also companies don't necessarily talk about that with their competitors, but in the context, once you're sort of in this disaster context, if you want your network back, you have to tell people where the priorities are. They have to know where your facilities are. They have to know where your big customers are. All that has to be sort of out on the table. And I think the companies do a pretty good job with it. We've been doing it long enough that we've built up the level of trust that happens. But it shouldn't be unappreciated. That's a big deal that companies do that because, once we get outside the disaster context, all of us have many, many differences on many, many issues. But we the companies do a great job of sort of putting that to the side for the most part.
Right, and from a public safety perspective, we look at it as we don't care. We don't care about your competition. We care about getting the public served, and it's good to hear that that's starting to happen because if we don't get the public's internet back up, we're in a wireless age, and if we don't get the access to the customers, it's the public safety that suffers. And so I totally agree with that part, and the trust has to be there. It has to be there that, okay, we're not going to use this against each other. We're not going to do this. We're going to go in and serve the public, and I think that's what this hearing is all about, and this roundtable is about is working together to get all of us working. The local governments, back to the comment about the mutual aid. Local governments, getting those local telcos into the EOCs, getting them to come introduce themselves and say, hey, look, we're here. Well, we know you're there, but who are you and how can we get a hold of you during those? We work every day with the local utilities fire happens, we've got to call the local utilities. Those guys know each other. It's the disasters that we don't actually have that relationship so often with the telcos, and it's good to hear that's building up. But you can also work with the local EOCs and the state EOCs to help with housing and shelter and finding a parking lot to set up a tent city in, or those kinds of things, or cooking. We can set up people with NGOs and faith-based organizations that we're just absolutely relying on during a disaster. Our whole community is. It's easy to fold in 200 people to feed every day when we've got those kinds of resources being done there.
Yeah, I would echo Shirley's comments. Mutual aid, mutual assistance, critical piece of how we function. I mean, I think during one of the storms in Florida last season, something like 50,000, people from around the country, 40-something states. Duke put 16,000 alone on the field during that storm, so a huge effort. And even though we're not sharing polls with our munis and co-ops, there is some historic territoriality, right, in our industry as well. And I think we've come 180 from where we used to be in terms of partnering in those moments. There might not be sort of formalized agreements like with our IOU partners. And credit to I see some of them, our EEI, Edison Electric folks here for helping sort of build those relationships. But we respond down to other competitor service territories all the time during these moments, absolutely. And from our telecom folks, you guys do share space on our polls. We can't tell sometimes when we go into these moments which is Comcast's line versus Verizon versus anyone else's line. Yeah. So I don't know a solution if there's some sort of color coding or something that could better help our teams be able to identify that, but that could be a takeaway of how we can more quickly get folks back online.
Yeah, I just want to comment also. I think what information is shared can be defined. I think a lot of times, from my perspective, if I'm a state level disaster coordinator, especially in first responder communications, I don't necessarily need the information you think I do. I think a lot of times we get stuck in the weeds on what actually the information is. A lot of the times we may not even understand what it means. I think so. I know that I will be getting that disaster information reporting system from the FCC. I'm going to get that report in, so I'm going to have data in front of me. I need more when things aren't going our way. I need more of a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and I think we can work with that. So I think rather than getting wrapped around what actually the information is or seeing colors on a map, I think it's important that we just have that. Are you okay? And no, we're not. So I think that is a great start. Just if we can get to that point of we're thumbs down in these areas, awesome. We can work with that from a planning perspective. We can work with that. That's good information. So.
I would also like to throw out the other thing that we've been seeing when we look at all these storm disasters is that the more my folks are bearing fiber, the less recovery issues right now. I do have a co-op that serves that whole hill country area, and just pinged them this morning saying, I'm coming over here, what do you need? And they were like, we actually think we're okay. And so, one of the things I hear from my folks is the less they can put on the poles, the better. The closer they can bring the electronics, those who are getting rid of their coax, the fewer electronics you have out in the field, and then more and more of these natural disasters, including these hurricanes. I look at Rev down in Louisiana. They've had some of those storms. Their plant down by the coast is all buried. So some of that recovery is not as catastrophic as we think. We have a disaster clearinghouse, and my team operates that as soon as a storm hits, wherever in the country my companies are impacted. I'm always, it's community needs as opposed to we need, or sometimes it's generators because unless you chain them down, they get stolen, but which is actually an issue. But in terms of the plant, other than Helene and Western North Carolina, which had the mountains and everything washing away and the mudslides, we're seeing that recovery. So technology choices as people go forward is also a really important one.
I will second that. In the hurricanes we saw last year, outside of Helene, but we've been bringing buried fiber into a lot of our tower sites for our AM and FM stations, and it performed remarkably well across Florida during the hurricanes last year. We had 100% uptime during the storm and immediately after at almost all of our sites where we had buried fiber coming into those facilities. So I will second that. It's been a huge improvement.
And that's part of what we look, from a Verizon perspective, we look at as well, is how much of our fiber, and not only our fiber, but when we look for third-party fiber, how much is that buried, how much is it aerial, how much can we get that aerial buried so that we have that diversity or hardening of that part of the network. But going back to the conversation of how do the local comms work together, and there's many examples of where I mentioned barrier islands before, and we've got fiber that's going out to that barrier island. Two of the companies may have had complete cuts on their fiber. The other company may not had any damage on their fiber, but they look for any open fiber that they may have or that they could resource out to anyone else that needs it to get their network back up. So there's that collaboration that does take place, and then we all separate our ways after we get everything recovered after that. But it's that I want to ensure that the commissioner here that's happening out there, and we do a lot of that out in the field on the front lines to get the network back up.
Well, I think from a public safety perspective, echoing what you're saying is the buried fiber, we're seeing very little problems, and that's the resilience that we've got to see and the robustness of we talk about next generation 911. That's what we're looking at. We're needing resilient, robust, and redundant networks. And as long as they're buried, we're finding that they are much more robust and resilient rather than the aerial fibers.
And let me just add on to that, just not from only from a fiber perspective, but we do approach this with a satellite perspective as well. So we don't get the same capacity as we need, but if we're trying to get just voice messaging or text messaging up, we're able to do that over as satellite communications. So depending on what area, how busy that site is, we always have that extra backup that we can go and try to deploy at a site to get something back up on the air. But that fiber is really, having it buried makes a difference in the recovery and how much we see getting damaged out there.
Yeah, we still use satellite as well, especially, I keep referencing North Carolina, but it was such a unique situation for us last year and probably for others. We still heavily use C-band, which came in clutch in delivering information during the height of the storm. And then we rapidly deployed out, in our case, Starlink, to immediately restore communications while a lot of the wired communications were down for that first 24, 36 hours.
Yeah, so I can give you a statistic of what everyone was up against. There was over 1,700 miles of fiber optic cable lost or destroyed during Hurricane Helene. And the challenge is where it used to be, the rules and regulations were in place, the right-of-ways and things like that. When that was no longer the case, where the fiber ran was now a river or the riverbed, that was a very unique challenge for all of our state emergency response team partners. And you have to be creative. Like you said, it's a very unique incident and event, hopefully something I never experience again in my career. But you have to be creative. The commissioner mentioned the kayak, the telecom provider using a kayak to get fiber down the river. I remember we had discussions about loading fiber in a helicopter and dumping it off the side over a mountaintop because it would be easier. That was quickly, I was told quickly that was not a good idea. But that's the collaboration that happens at these command and control points. Those ideas that are shared, those very unique situations that present us challenges. If we have the people around us that we trust and we're friends with, and we're not just meeting that day, those solutions come out. So I think and that is what you guys were up against.
I would just continue on the infrastructure hardening. I mean, we've certainly seen improvements with that effort in our company. You know, metal poles for wood poles, things like that, low-hanging fruit. On the technology side, self-healing technology has shaved, I mean, hundreds of millions of minutes. We track it in the minutes from our outage. I mean, Milton alone was 200 million minutes less outages due to our hardening efforts. We lost only a quarter of the poles than we had previously. Undergrounding, it benefits certainly, but there's another side of that. I brought a picture actually of corrosion. This is the day after the storm when we dug our equipment up. So it's not totally safe from storm surge, in particular wind, rain, absolutely, but frontline communities where water gets into the ground, it can be harder to identify damage. So we've had some lessons learned even on undergrounding.
I don't have a question, too. No, fair, and thank you all. Going to throw it to Greg just a little bit on this one, and it's simply, we've talked about relationships so far, you know, blue sky, bad day, and getting folks in. How did North Carolina handle engagement with industry during Helene, you know, in presence, phone calls? How did that propagate out?
So my job as a statewide interoperability coordinator, it is my responsibility to build those relationships prior to my state having a bad day. So that is baked in our DNA. Our SWICs, the men and women who are SWICs across the country and in territories that's our mission. Our mission is to form up a team and move out. So we've been having bi-monthly team meetings since 2018. So a lot of the people that mobilized knew exactly what was happening. We did not have to introduce one another, and things just kind of fell in place. I think it was more of a care for each other. You know, the men and women of North Carolina's State Emergency Response Team, first responder communications folks, they poured their heart out, right? And they're not necessarily willing to do that if they're not invested in the mission. And I think you get that investment by doing the work up front as a statewide interoperability coordinator or an emergency support function 2 leader in a state or a territory. You have no other choice than to go after it, you know, aggressively with tenacity, because if you don't, it quickly overwhelms your capabilities, and it overwhelms your ability to go after something like Helene. And we learned that very fast, but we learned it all together. Which is vital, in my opinion, in the first responder community.
So Greg, can I ask, what do you see like going forward? So I would think your lessons learned and Jack's and others are really important. Like when you have those, you know, bi-monthly or twice monthly meetings, whatever they are, do you invite like the power folks, the communication providers, so they all know you in advance, and you see that as part of your role? And do you see that happening across the country in other states?
So we invite anyone who is willing to take 1 hour every other Wednesday afternoon. And that is from Association of Broadcasters, North Carolina. We have co-ops in our energy sector partner within North Carolina Emergency Management, that Emergency Support Function 12 lead. She is on those calls as well. So I see a pattern of evolution within our position as SWICs. I think more and more, we spoke about technology and the advancements of technology and our reliance on smart devices and energy to actually make decisions. So we're seeing this evolution of information sharing amongst the statewide interoperability coordinators to get the lessons learned out there. So if the state of California is learning a lesson today, Texas today, those lessons learned have to come out almost immediately. So, for example, during Hurricane Helene, we knew what was about to happen. So immediately we made the decision to get a partner, one of my counterparts from another part of the country. So my counterpart in Wisconsin deployed and rode right seat for me almost the entire time. So she was there just to take it in, learn, be that clear, be that little voice in your head, if you will, and gather up all that information just in case the state of Wisconsin had their bad day. So yes, that is happening. And we are really, as the SWIC community, we're stepping it up because the hazard is evolving and becoming more complex. And we're just talking about weather today. So there are other adversaries and things that we need to really be aware of, and we need to be one step ahead constantly. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a key point because, right, today we've only been talking hurricanes really, but these same people are dealing with wildfires, they're dealing with blizzards, they're dealing with, flash flooding, with derechos, with whatever it is. And so the exact response may vary based on what you're dealing with, but the sort of high level, we need everybody coming together on a regular basis all year round is the same. And there are some states who are sort of out front in this because they have more stuff they've been dealing with for a longer time. But you can see, like, no one's immune. There's no place that doesn't have disasters. And the lessons learned, it may not be, when we, in our cross-sector resiliency forum, we don't use best practices. We talk about successful practices because it's more of, here's a thing we did in this place that worked. Let's get that out there, let people know about that, so that if something comes up in their state, they can say, well, let's try something like this. Let's fit it to who we have here in this state and their experience and organization. But spreading that sort of knowledge, I think, is going to be critical over the next few years, because we're starting to see, Louisiana, yes, they know hurricanes, but like last year or 2 years ago, you had wildfires, right? So that's like, who would have thought? And it turns out in California, there are people who have a lot of experience with that, who can be very helpful to the folks in Louisiana. And so sharing as much as possible across states and across experiences is really sort of the next phase that, like, everybody needs to kind of work on, so that, like, people are as prepared as possible wherever something happens.
Yeah, I think we have to have that mindset that we are just one place at one time, and we need other people to help us. I know in Louisiana, one of the things that we do is we try to shadow, very much like what you said. We try to shadow each other and be that clear voice to the person going through the disaster, because we have to remember, these people are not just human robots. They are actually going through the disaster too, and that their families are. And so we have to look at that and go, how can they have that clear voice beside them to say, hey, don't forget this, or you're being personally invested in this decision. Stop and look at the data that we have and make the best judgment that you can, because we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're going through something someone else has probably gone through before. It may be the power company that is helping the 911 director that's saying, hey, have you thought about this from your 911 center? And we're going, no, why would I think about that? Well, that's very important for us in our business. And we look back and go, I'm going to put that in my emergency plan from now on. So it's always constantly working and reading and constantly educating, but that intersectionality of our different disciplines, whether it's public, private, corporate, whatever it is, we're out there learning, and we need to work with each other. Even attend other conferences that we go to and talk with power companies or telcos about what's happening in our agencies. In your companies coming into our conference of public safety professionals.
Yeah, I think storytelling is important in our business. I think a lot can be learned from storytelling, and good stories. Right? I think my counterpart in the Commonwealth of Virginia always starts off his meetings with a good story. So does anybody have any good stories out there? That's huge. I think just if you are approaching, situations that aren't pleasant, I think starting that off with a positive approach is important. So.
Thank you. I see we're coming up on time. I got some notes about relationships and resilience. I'd like to give the panel an opportunity to kind of give us a takeaway or something that you'd like us to focus on as we go into hurricane season. And Jack, I'm just going to start and roll down the line with.
I think what I'd like to end for me with is just communication, working together, talking during the blue skies, because when the black and gray skies come, we're heads down. There's other analogies there, but we're heads down, nose to the grindstone, and working hard. And that's what we're doing. And we need to have those relationships built ahead of time, working together, and sharing. I think the term that I would use here is actionable intelligence, things that we can actually do at that particular time to make it better for the public. And that's what our job is every day, whether we're in public safety or we're in the power or telco or those companies, is working together, but having actionable intelligence to go out there and work on.
Yeah, I would echo. I mean, there's no over communication. I don't think it's possible. So just continuing to improve year round that collaboration. The other thing, just ongoing patience. Sometimes we're the victims of our own success in this space. What used to be weeks of outages are now boiled down to, days or even hours. And sometimes folks forget that history and, oh my God, if you're a day late now, when's my power going to be back on? What's taking you guys so long? So these are still incredible catastrophes, right? We're seeing total infrastructure devastation being destroyed, having to do complete rebuilds, not restoration. So just still patience with us.
One takeaway from my experience working in the power industry was under promise, over deliver. Set the expectations via that promise, as opposed to get my cell phone out. I want connectivity now. So yeah, we take that to heart to give the public and the people that are relying on that service an honest expectation, because there's a lot of things as we've discussed. Got to get teams in the field, got to get debris out of the way. You got to make sure that the temporary solutions that you put on the ground aren't broke, cut, run over, and then you lose them as you go along. So very much putting some realistic expectations and using broadcast and others to help push that message and through the EOCs is a good start.
Okay, I want to stay along that same talk track. Just personal experience that the multiple hurricanes that I've been through, that pre-planning is so important. That communications, knowing how I work with the state, that local or the federal EOCs that are out there. How do I work with the EOC with Duke Power and Duke Energy and being able to collaborate with them, taking advantages of the resources that we all bring to the table to get restore services, whether it's power or comms, for our first responders, for the search and rescue. That's always the first priority that we're looking for. So, the takeaway here is really, again, take advantage of that blue sky, get out there and have those drills or just quick meetings of who we're talking to, how do we collaborate together when we get into that gray sky situation, how we're going to work together.
I think I would hope the takeaway for people who are watching this is to be impressed at sort of the complete agreement we have among, all these very different stakeholders who are all involved in dealing with these, terrible situations. And I think what, hopefully people are hearing is that every single sector is committed to working together, to getting facilities back up as quickly as possible, to making sure 911 calls go through, and that we've really got a game plan, that works, to work with local governments, to work with our counterparts. And, you know, it may not always be perfect. We're dealing with really bad situations, but like, you've got professionals who are committed to this and doing a good job on it, and that you should feel good about like how everyone is handling these situations.
I just want to kind of echo, I'll go back to what we kind of led with, is that communications ecosystem. I think we need to start normalizing the topic of being without connectivity. That is a scary place to be. I think, but if we normalize that conversations within our families, our family units, just to say, well, if we're separated and we lose connectivity, what do we do? You know, kind of like the stop, drop, and roll or the exit drills in the home. We're taught those things at young ages. I think we should start normalizing that topic to say, we don't want it to happen, but it might. So if it does, this is what we should do as a family. Honored to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Takeaway for me thinking about iHeart and really broadcasters as a whole is that, you know, our biggest thing is access and fuel. I think we go in knowing we really need to be self-sufficient for the first 48 to 72 hours. But after that, the bigger takeaway is how do we make sure that broadcasters are on a first name basis with Greg and others in our government partners, so that after that 72 hours, if we still need access and fuel, you know, we have that lifeline to be able to help coordinate that and keep these radio stations on the air.
And I also thank you all for this discussion. It's really important and timely. Drew, I have been known to bring cookies out to crews when they come, so like, trust me, I never take it for granted. My takeaway, you know, running a major trade association, I'm already thinking about how we can connect the dots. That's one of the things we do, and so I'm thinking as I'm looking at all of you in public safety, because it is so important. How do I make sure that my member companies are on the FEMA list? They're on the local public safety list. They're on the DHS list, FCC, the DERS, you know, all of those things. How do I make sure that that connection happens? So one of the things my team's already gonna be like, oh my gosh, Shirley, stop it. But, you know, going back and figuring out who are those intersection points in each state and what can we do to connect our folks now? Because it is blue sky today. So greatly appreciate all I've learned today, so thank you.
I hope the audience and those online do take some heart in that we have a good baseline and foundation of interdependence from a variety of perspectives, different industries, different levels of government, different disciplines within the communications sector, and that we'll work hard to foster that further as we go into the hurricane season. With that, I'll turn it over to the moderator. I'd like to thank our panelists and go into a 10-minute break.
Round of applause. You're an astounding group of folks, and we're so grateful that you could be here to bring your experience to the conversation. I think we're only going to do a 5-minute break, but if anyone needs to use the bathroom, exit to the left or right, and we'll come back with panel 2 in about 5 minutes. Thanks. Alrighty, everyone. 5 minutes goes way too fast, I know. But if we can start coming back to our seats, and then we'll get rolling. All right, welcome back, everyone. So it's time for our second panel today, which is called Current Government Intra-Industry and Cross-Industry Partnerships. Panel 2 will be moderated by Leon Kenworthy, who's the chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau's Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division. I'll turn it over to Leon.
Good morning. Thanks, Josh. As Josh said, my name is Leon Kenworthy. I'm Chief of the Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division here at the FCC. And I'm excited for another exciting panel discussion. So in panel one, we talked a little bit about preparing for and restoring after hurricanes from a power and communication sector collaboration standpoint. And in this panel, we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into what that collaboration and those partnerships look like in terms of intersector collaboration between the power and communication sectors, but also within industry and between industry and state, local, and federal government agencies. So I think rather than reading through everyone's biography, I'll take my cue from the last panel and ask each of you to take some time just to introduce yourself, talk about the organization you're representing, and a little bit about your relevant experience. Start with Scott.
My last name starts with double A, so I'm used to going first. So, hey, good morning, everybody. As Leon mentioned, Scott Aronson. I am the Senior Vice President for Energy Security and Industry Operations at the Edison Electric Institute. EEI was mentioned in the last panel in a positive light, which I always appreciate. But EEI is a trade association representing all of the nation's investor-owned electric companies. So I think as folks know, the electric power sector is broken down. We have investor-owned electric companies that EEI represents. We have municipal systems, and we have cooperative systems, as well as independent power generators and our Canadian partners. It is a North American grid, and we are heavily interconnected internationally in that regard. My background and a little bit about how I come at this particular set of issues, in addition to helping to lead security and preparedness issues for EEI, I also serve as part of the Secretariat for the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council, or ESCC. And again, this isn't just EEI's members, but also the cooperatives, the municipals, and all of the different entities that have something to do with helping to keep electricity operational. The other thing I like to say, and I'll sort of pull on this thread as we talk throughout the morning, we're critical infrastructure, and that's not just a fun label we like to put on things. We are critical to national security. We are critical to the health and safety of the communities that our companies serve, and so we have common cause to work together as the electric power sector, and increasingly cross-sector, certainly with telecom, but others as well. If you think about electricity, we're sort of thought of as this apex industry. Everybody relies on us. If we don't have telecommunications, we can't operate. If we don't have water, we can't generate steam and cool our systems. If we don't have transportation and pipelines, we can't move fuel. If we don't have financial services, we don't have access to capital markets, we can't trade our product. So there are a lot of ways to impact the electric power sector short of attacking the electric power sector. I use the word attack pretty purposefully. Yes, we are talking about storm preparation and all that sort of parade of horribles that was listed in the last panel. But we're also not just talking about acts of God, but also acts of war. Critical infrastructure is a target for our adversaries. They want to hold the United States at risk at a time of their choosing, and so we have to be prepared for acts of war, acts of God, to be able to respond and recover and not just stop every bad thing from happening, but be resilient when they do. So that's the approach and sort of perspective that EEI and I bring to today's conversation.
Good morning. I'm Chris Anderson. I'm the Principal Advisor for National Security and Emergency Preparedness at Lumen Technologies, a major wireline provider here in the U.S. I'm also kind of wearing a second hat here on the panel. I serve as the industry elected chair for the Communications ISAC, which is within, it's not really a cross-industry partnership, but within the communications industry, it's really kind of the fundamental national level partnership for communication providers in the area of preparedness and incident response. My approach to this, I think, is shaped. I've been kind of in this game for 25 years or so, and that's come across through, I worked earlier in my career at the predecessor agency for what's now CISA, where Victor works today. In the Office of Infrastructure Protection. So I sort of started with a very broad perspective on what all of critical infrastructure is, how it's interconnected, and the best ways to make those systems resilient from a disaster preparedness and a national security perspective. I actually spent a little bit of time here at the commission as well, focused on emergency management during my time here. So that's where I really began to hone in and see from a communications perspective, both the things, I guess to Scott's point, the things on which communications relies in order to continue to operate, and the things which rely upon communications and that web of interconnectedness. And then during my time at Lumen, again, it's like Scott, like you already said everything that needed to be said. My role there really does combine the disaster preparedness, so the emergency preparedness piece of my title focused on disasters and wildfires and hurricanes and floods, but also the national security piece. So thinking about, certainly a Cat 5 hurricane coming ashore is a bad day, but what does a nationwide really bad day look like? How can we prepare for that today? How can we be prepared to respond to it tomorrow? So look forward to the discussion with my fellow panelists, and Victor, over to you.
Thank you. Victor Valentine Davis, as Chris mentioned, with CISA. Within CISA, I am the Associate Director for Preparedness, also the Deputy Assistant Director for Emergency Communications within CISA. I have the ESF2, or Emergency Support Function 2 portfolio, which is communications. I also have the ESF14 cross-sector function, and oversee and have the privilege of being the government chair of the comms ISAC. I oversee the National Center for Telecommunications Coordination, or NCC, which serves as the comms ISAC, which is it is the industry government joint center that has the responsibility and lead for the initiation and restoration of comms, both during and after incidents and or disasters. Over to you.
That's great. So Joe Vines, I'm the VP of Regulatory Affairs at Charters Communications. I'm also the industry-elected vice chair of the Communication ISAC. I'll assume the chairman's role in January. Chris and I have traded that position back and forth a few times. Which is great. I'm also the industry-elected secretary of the National Council of ISAC. So I work closely with the other 25 ISACs across all 15 critical infrastructure sectors. And like Scott, I am also on the executive committee of our sector coordinating council, where we come together and work collaboratively as companies and do take on some operational issues that are associated with policies and so on and so forth. So it's a very good integration within our sector. So I have been in the industry, cable industry, for almost 42 years. Started very young. Over half of that time has been in technical operations and risk management roles. So I understand keenly the issues that we face during natural disasters and even man-made disasters for that matter. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I guess I'll turn it back to Leon.
Thanks to everybody in the room. We also have two panelists joining remotely, so maybe I'll turn things over first to Sherry to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. I'm Sherry Morgan. I'm the Joint Use Support Manager at Alabama Power Company. We serve 1.4 to 1.5 million electric service customers. In my joint use role, I deal with pole attachments and working with any of the communication companies that access our poles. I also serve as the Southern Company Joint Use Committee Chairman, so I work with my counterparts at Alabama Power and Mississippi Power. I've got approximately 32 years of experience with Alabama Power Company in operations, in getting power out to the customers, restoring service in storms, and everyone at the power company has their day job and then they have their storm job. So I look forward to engaging in this committee. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Sherry. Tom, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Tom Beddix. I'm our Director of Network Operations with Southern Link Wireless. Southern Link's a wholly owned subsidiary of Southern Company. So Sherry with Alabama Power is part of our, I guess, a sister company of ours. We run the LTE wireless network for Southern Company. One of the things we did with the build out of our network was kind of have resiliency, reliability, and security kind of baked in from the beginning when we built our network. So things like having redundant data centers or packet cores. We've got backup generation that lasts 7 days, at least 7 days at all of our cell sites, or over 99% of our cell sites in our territory. We've got redundant communications, whether that be a microwave link or fiber connectivity to get the communications from the cell sites back to our data centers, and then things like farm animals, which we call farm animals. Those are our mobile assets. So even though we have a lot of redundancy and availability built into our network, we mentioned Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Michael in the previous panel. Those both hit our service territories, and so having mobile satellite, mobile generators, mobile cell sites that can be brought in to get communications back up quickly for our first responders and for our utilities is paramount. One of the things we do, and I'm sure we'll get into it, is work very closely with our utility partners as well as first responders, emergency management associations, not only during storms but also pre-storms, and making sure that communications is very smooth, because when things are in emergency status, you got to have those relationships and be ready to move forward and be transparent with each other. So look forward to our discussion today.
Thanks, Tom. Well, maybe I'll kick things off with a question about what are some current examples of successful cross-sector partnerships between power and communications providers. And I'd like for this to be a conversation among the panelists, but maybe just for the sake of kicking things off, I'll turn this over to Victor, given your sort of bird's eye view over, from CISA of both industries.
Thank you. So one of the relationships that I'll speak about is really the relationship between the ESFs, especially during a response. As I think everybody heard Greg mentioned earlier at the state level, there's a very good relationship between the ESF 12 power and the ESF 2. That's also something that you see at the national level. And one of the things that the ISAC, I think, does a very good job of is connecting not just the response or information that's going at the local level or down on the ground up to the national level, but also making sure that it opens up. And even though it is the comms ISAC, it does a good job of, during a response, making sure that there's a forum for everybody who needs to include our ESF 12 partners to come on and share information at the exact same time, so that you don't have what you see at times, which is a wide disconnect at the national level from what you see on the ground. We try, and we saw during the wildfires last year that, what works best is to have, everyone, to include folks at the national level at the same time, sharing the same information on the same call, so that when you hear it, it's the same, and everybody understands exactly what the situation is, where the need is, and that information doesn't have to then be repeated again and again and again, as you sometimes see during response. So I think the relationship between those ESFs in the response is one of the key relationships that I think is very successful and works very well. There are other tri-sector and power resiliency and comm sector relationships that I will let Chris and Joe speak to. But I think from a government industry perspective, the ESF 2 and 12 relationship with the comm ISAC supporting is one of the strongest and most successful.
Scott, since we're hosting this at the FCC, I'll let the away team go first. And if you want to talk a little bit from the power sector perspective here.
I appreciate that. You guys are good hosts. I agree completely with everything that Victor just said, and maybe let me pull on a couple of threads from there, and then also from the previous panel. I think the emergency support function relationships are critical, and let me say something nice about our sector risk management agency in the power sector. We work really closely with the Department of Energy. In that Department of Energy relationship with the Department of Homeland Security, with FEMA through the ESF 12, ESF 2, and all the others has been incredibly valuable, back to what I said about cross-sector collaboration. Other successes, and Victor started to mention it, so there's the Cross-Sector Resiliency Forum, which is something that has grown up over the last few years, since 2020. Maybe one of the themes that I want to kind of highlight here is all of this is us as private industry getting better. So our sort of mantra in this is better today than we were yesterday, better tomorrow than we are today. If you think about mutual assistance in the electric power sector, it actually started as bilateral agreements in the 1880s between Edison illuminating companies, and then it sort of evolved to a more regional approach. And then after 2012, Superstorm Sandy created this need to be a little bit more national in scope as well. But giving authority to the smallest entity possible remains the most important thing. So things like the Cross-Sector Resiliency Forum, which bring together folks like Chris and Joe and me and our respective teams, are invaluable so that we're not getting to know each other in the middle of an incident, but highlighting the value of coordination and partnership at the Emergency Operations Center in communities, in counties, at the state level, where the real work is done, is part of what we try to do here. So folks here in DC have this sort of feeling that we have the solutions to all of the problems. We don't. And we don't have 3,000-mile-long screwdrivers, so we really need our folks in the field to be working together. And so I think a lot of success between this sector as we've evolved our capability is because of relationships like the sector coordinating councils, like this emergency support functions, like the Cross-Sector Resiliency Forum, like the ISACs, like the Tri-Sector Working Group that brings together comms, electric, and finance, sort of the bedrock or foundation of society, so that we can be better today than we were yesterday and better tomorrow than we are today. So those are some of the successes that I would highlight of coordination that are happening right now.
Chris, you want to?
I'd like to dive in with sort of a couple of additional thoughts about partnership. One is that I keep stealing Scott's points, but he said, that's not the one solution. I think it's important to stress that there is no one solution to the relationship problem. And if there were, you wouldn't want that either, because what you need are a set of mutually reinforcing partnerships and relationships, because when things go bump in the night, the person who was your golden go-to contact might have had their house burned down, or might not be there, or they might be taking care of their family, or whatever. So you need to have kind of this interlocking mesh of relationships. And a couple that I would highlight that we haven't discussed already, the first one is simply a bilateral company-to-company relationship. We are each other's suppliers, we are each other's customers, and that relationship is actually really important, because that gives you a chance to talk with your provider and really drill down on what sites are important to you, where do you need redundant comms, where do you need two sources of power that feed off different substations and exit out different sides of the building. And so I think that's kind of a building block and shouldn't be overlooked. The other, kind of almost in the opposite direction, thing that I wanted to stress, Scott brought it up, of course, is the tri-sector. So communications, energy, and financial services have long had an informal partnership where we would work together, particularly comms and energy in the disaster response perspective, bringing in finance in sort of the broader resiliency perspective. But that has grown into a very functional set of relationships. So we have an established structure and playbook with templates and everything, so that if we feel the need to get that group together at sort of a national strategic priority setting level. We know exactly how to do that. We drill it at least once a quarter. We actually had one a couple of weeks ago, fortuitously timed, just as things were on the rising tension scope in the Middle East. So it gave us all a chance to kind of say, what are you seeing? What are you seeing? And so we have that, we practice it, and we use it. And that relationship has grown in all kinds of interesting ways organically. We have gotten together the three sectors to do cyber defense exercises, hands-on keyboard, actual attack and defend, red team versus blue team exercises as the three sectors. And we get together at sort of a more executive level to think about things like, how does the new National Security Memo on Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience, how does that affect our relationship with each other, with our SRMAs? What are our key priorities? And so we really leverage that tri-sector relationship from fairly operational levels all the way up to sort of the national strategy perspectives.
Oh, Leon, we've got a comment from Tom.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, I was just going to expand on what Chris was just saying in terms of some of the collaboration. But one of the things that we found very successful is being in person in the emergency management centers when there is a disaster. So having a representative in there that can communicate, where we have communications issues or outages, and understanding where their priorities are is key. But it goes beyond that. It's not just being there during storms. It's also kind of what was already been hit on, is doing tabletop exercises on blue sky days and forming those relationships so that you really do understand ahead of time, hey, here's where our staging area is going to be if this happens, or here's some critical infrastructure we have. Let's make sure we've got redundant coverage for this area. So kind of understanding sensitive areas ahead of time and collaborating with tabletop exercises, and then being in person in the storm centers. So both emergency management, like the Georgia EMA, we were in that storm center during Hurricane Helene, kind of understanding their priorities and getting the communications working for them was paramount. Same thing with Georgia Power during Hurricane Helene, having representatives in that storm center, being able to communicate, here's the priorities, here's where we need to go next, and just making sure we're working safely and collaborating together. It's been really successful for us.
Thanks. And I think maybe we'll go to Joe and then finish up on this question with Sherry.
Great, thank you. So a couple of examples of what I think are highly effective partnerships. And I'm going to look over at my friend Scott and talk a little bit about Central Hudson Power Company. And I always bring this one up when we're talking to our friends at EEI and elsewhere. They hold specific calls with all of their telecom partners during significant events, as recently as the 4th of July. They had all the telecom partners, they have district managers that actually host calls, and they collaborate one-on-one. They do exercises. We're hearing that as a recurring theme as well. So I want to just throw that out there as a best practice. I'm also going to compliment our friends in North Carolina, Mr. Hauser. Very effective. The fact that you welcome everyone into the dialogue and the discussion is hugely important. It wasn't too long ago when emergency operations centers did not think about cable companies, for example, and the importance of backhaul fiber and other things that the cable companies contribute to. So hugely important to make sure that you have everybody at the table. And I actually told Greg that I was going to do this. I have a prop. So this is my ID from a few years ago that gets me into the state EOC in North Carolina. And he was right when he says State Emergency Response Team, the CERT team. Industry is actually a member of the team with the government partner. So I just wanted to say that's a best practice. It'd be great if more communities kind of adopted your approach, Greg. And then finally, one other use case or example. I have a biweekly call. The cable industry has a biweekly call with EEI, Edison Electric Institute. and we collaborate on how to improve communication back and forth. We welcome the other communication companies, so Lumen quite often joins us as well. And then annually, we invite the power companies to come to our annual Society of Cable Telecommunication Engineers Expo, Technology Expo, and where we come together in person. So in September, we're going to do that here in DC. Last year we did it in Atlanta, and I remember meeting Sherry at least there, if not in prior years as well. So very, very important work that we do. And then the electric sector reciprocates. So, we work closely with the Electricity ISAC on their grid exercise. We work with DOE on their ClearPath exercise. And then, of course, the National Response Exercise, which is hosted at the Edison Electric Institute every year. So we appreciate being invited. We're going to show up. We're going to work with you. And things will only get better if we keep communicating. And I'm echoing that from the first panel as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Sherry?
Yes, I just wanted to kind of plug in here as well on the collaboration piece. The Cross-Sector Resiliency Forum has been a huge connector between us, the utilities, and the cable companies and other telecommunications companies. And that's maintained by EEI. And that's an excellent way to find those people in the heat of the battle when you haven't done your blue sky day, but we would prefer to have those connections in advance so we know when the phone rings who it is. But one of the benefits there is, at least on the Southern Company side, if you're trying to find someone at Georgia Power and you can't find that person in the middle of a storm or in an event, it's also got the roll-up connections to the other opcos so that ultimately one of us is there. Just to the point that was made earlier, the person you normally call may not be there because they have their own emergency that day. So the Cross-Sector Resiliency Forum is an excellent spot to start for those connections, and it's been very successful.
If I could maybe pull on a thread from something you mentioned, Chris, when it comes to bilateral relationships on the ground between utilities and communications providers, what do those relationships look like in practice? Are they memorialized in a formal written agreement or memorandum of understanding? Or are they less formal? What sort of issues do those relationships and those agreements address before you head into an emergency, whether it's sharing of resources, whether it's prioritizing restoration, those sorts of issues?
So I imagine my fellow panelists will want to weigh in on this one too. I mean, I think there's really subtly two parts to your question, right? There's the question of, in the bilateral relationship as I laid it out, which is we provide communication services to Company A, and Company A provides power services to us. And those, like any other commercial relationship, are going to have contracts with service level agreements and those sorts of things. But then the relationship that builds around that is really important. So it's learning things like, this is a silly example, but being able to speak each other's languages in a way that cuts through a lot of the BS during a response, right? We learned that one of the things we need to be able to do is say, we're having a power outage at this facility and here's our meter number, because that's what our power provider wants to know. And now they know when they call us, we're having a problem with these circuits and here's the circuit ID, or here's our automated ticket number, as opposed to, fumbling around and giving a street address and now you have to try to do a reverse lookup and, well, wait a minute, we have 17 meters assigned to that street. So there's that component of the bilateral relationship. There's also the sort of more open, we're both operating, serving other customers in the same area that's been struck by a disaster. And that one is a little bit more free-flowing, and it depends on the nature of the disaster, the nature of the area, the nature of the providers involved. Are they big? Are they small? Are they co-ops? Are they big investor-owned? So I think that's something that really varies. And one of the things I think Greg, in his discussion of working with the other SWCs, is learning from, hey, we made it through the California wildfires, and we learned a lot in that about how do we coordinate between comms and power, and making sure those lessons get at least taught nationwide. They may not be applicable because the structures are different, the government's different, the players are different, but where you can find those little nuggets of, hey, we can take that idea, twist it 90 degrees and plug it in where we are and get some of the goodness out of it.
I don't know if other panelists have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to just chime in on that. We failed to mention that the partnership that we have with CISA and DHS prior to that and DOD prior to that dates back to the mid-'80s. We come together every Monday morning at 9 a.m. and collaborate with each other and with our government partners. So that is hugely important and helps with a mutual understanding. We're starting to see more of the SWCs joining us on our Monday morning 9 a.m. call, which is fantastic because it provides more information at the local and state levels as well. Are these formal partnerships? There is a charter that we live by with the ComISAC, but a lot of them are informal, and that's fine. We don't need a written formal agreement to do this. It's worked very, very well for many decades, actually, in the comm sector in particular. And I like the idea that during incidences, we're also seeing power companies come on. Florida Light and Power is an example of one a few years ago. Duke Energy has been on our calls, so on and so forth. So very good, very helpful with the overall communication. Again, no formal agreement to do that.
So maybe I'll just add on the power sector side. It sounds a little bit, it doesn't sound tangible, right? We're just talking about relationships and a common language, but that's incredibly valuable. And, for all the reasons that have been said, I just for sort of effect love to use both there's a General Eisenhower quote and a Mike Tyson quote that I juxtapose for fun. And you guys know what they are, right? It's plans are useless, but planning is everything. That was General Eisenhower. And everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. That was Mike Tyson. And of course we're going to get punched in the mouth, but having those relationships before that happens is incredibly valuable. So again, to the points that both Chris and Joe have made, some of these are very formal relationships that have existed for a long time or kind of become more formal in recent years because of expectations from customers and communities and just for the need of national security. Some of them are a little bit more ad hoc, but I appreciate Joe mentioning Central Hudson. He just mentioned Florida Power and Light. We've talked about North Carolina and their experience with Helene and Milton. Certainly the Southern Company folks can talk in more detail. They've had more than their fair share of storms and do extraordinary coordination. Going back to some of the stories out of Katrina are some of the most impactful in how they worked with the sector and with the comm sector to get communications back up after that extraordinary event. I also think about the value of prioritization and of understanding criticality. I don't think there is a full appreciation still between the two sectors on this thing, substation, line, generating facility, control center, really matters. And this, you might think it matters, but it really doesn't. And I think we have the same sort of challenge on the comm side. Wait, that really matters? I didn't know that. So again, having people in the field at emergency operations centers working together in blue sky days to be able to understand that level of criticality and prioritization helps us when the bad day comes.
One of the issues that was raised in the first panel is that within both of these sectors, you have, really big utility companies, that are providing service across a number of states. You have the same thing in the communication sector, right? You have the nationwide wireless providers, large cable companies, but then you have a lot of like really small providers. And I wondered, maybe Sherry, if you could talk a little bit about, from the perspective of an electric utility, what is your experience in working with the bigger communications providers, but also the smaller companies, and helping understand what they need, and also that they can prioritize restoring communications service for you if that's affected by a disaster?
One of the best things you can do is talk before the storm and identify those data centers, critical connections for you guys in the communications world. Someone made the point earlier, there's that brick building in the middle of town that nobody thinks anything happens, but it's essential to all the 911 stuff. So understanding those locations, and that truly, because in a big storm, one person can't house all that information. That's going to be a lot of local knowledge, local communications. It's the person who runs that operations for the telecommunications company knowing who their counterpart is at the power company, whoever that utility is. So when the phone rings, you understand that it's an important call and you can respond. I've worked in a small office and I've worked in the storm center for the whole company. And the attention to detail is different based on what level you're looking at things. So those one-on-one relationships can't be trumped by a corporate connection. Understanding those critical pieces. I mean, there's one thing to have a small neighborhood meter that's out versus a data center. The cross-sector resiliency forum, I'll go back to that. During, I think it was Zeta, we received calls from various communications companies where 911 backhaul had been interrupted because of an outage, and there was also a data center outage. Having that common language of here's my meter number makes all the difference in us knowing exactly what's going on. And then those corporate relationships can kick in and help the local people. So there's a lot of it's a lot of knowing who to call, and it is a lot of one-on-one local relationship building as well.
Thanks. And I mean, one of the reasons we wanted to have you, Sherry, and Tom on this panel is because you have this somewhat unique situation where you're both part of the same corporate parent, providing both power and communication services. I wonder, Tom, if you could talk a little bit about how that works for Southern Link, because I know you cover a lot of the same area that is also covered by the power companies that are owned by Southern Company, and how that process of working together to remediate issues looks in practice.
Yeah, I'd say, thank you, Leon. It really works in two different areas. One is kind of pre-storm, having at least biannual meetings with our storm centers at Mississippi Power, Alabama Power, Georgia Power. So we've got strong relationships with them. We're included in all the tabletop exercises. So we just had a cybersecurity and storm exercise we went through, and just making sure that, like you said, talking the same language, because telecommunications is definitely different than the utility speak. And so knowing how to communicate and prioritize, ahead of time is good. We really work on ahead of time in terms of the staging areas. So we know where Alabama Power, Georgia Power, Mississippi Power, where their staging areas are. So we, check our communications to those. We know if there's a disaster hitting the Gulf Coast, we know where, folks are going to be staged, and just making sure we've got extra redundancy at those areas so that they can communicate when they have masses of people in an area. And then during the storm, let me just say this: when we know there's a storm coming, we provide our utility partners updates. So, hey, here's what we're doing to prepare for the storm, and kind of knowing where they're staging their folks, and we'll pre-stage our mobile assets, like I mentioned, our mobile generators, our mobile cell sites, our mobile satellite, making sure we're ready to respond, especially where they're going to be, and then after the storm hits, being transparent in terms of, here's where our trouble areas are. Here's where we've got some issues, and understanding their priorities of, hey, we really need communications at this substation for safety reasons and for criticality, and we prioritize those, as well as with our emergency management partners. The critical areas, understanding where those are for them and getting that communications up as quickly as possible is key for us. I say, in general, we've just got a utility mindset when it comes to storm response. So it's work safely, number one, but also, we're going to work 24/7, getting things back up and running as quickly as possible. And I guess just being transparent and communicating the priorities, understanding those has been key for us and being successful with that.
And I'll just chime back in on what Tom's saying. Every time we have a storm event, we have telecommunications in the room with us, and our operations centers that are monitoring power issues are monitoring through telecommunications. So we see the importance and acknowledge the importance of all the things telecom being up and running, whether it's internal Southern Link or external with other telecommunications providers. Without that, we can't restore effectively. We can't operate resiliency type switching schemes. So we rely heavily on the communications part of the equation. To the point made earlier, we're your customer, you're our customer. So that is key, and we're watching that all the time, and we're testing things on a routine basis, on a daily basis.
So we've been talking a lot about collaboration between the power and communication sectors. I wonder, and maybe I'll pose this question first to Joe, about what collaboration within sectors looks like. And, among communications providers before, during, and after a hurricane, whether it's sharing of equipment and fuel, in the case of wireless providers, roaming during disaster agreements, those sorts of practices. How does that look in the communications sector?
First of all, I'm not the expert on roaming, so I'm not going to go there. I'll leave that to my wireless carrier colleagues. However, we, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we meet every Monday morning at 9 a.m. And more specifically, the network service providers of the ComISAC meet separately from our government partners every Monday morning at 10 a.m. So we're highly collaborative. We work closely with one another. As Chris indicated, or someone indicated earlier, we're each other's customers. The nation doesn't work without all of us in terms of communication. So with the wireline companies doing backhaul for the mobile wireless carriers, the nationwide carriers, to them providing obviously services to our folks. So we're in constant communication with each other. I would say the largest 7 ISPs have regular communication and participate in tabletop exercises with the government and with each other on a fairly regular basis. So we learn a lot from one another, and we know what to expect during a major incident. And one thing that occurred to me when I was listening to the panel one is resiliency is in our DNA. It's in the DNA of Charter. It's in the DNA of Lumen, of AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, so on and so forth. It has to be, because in order for us to maintain the networks, we have to make sure that we're out there and we're working closely with one another to make sure that we get everything back up and running as soon as possible.
And so when you're actually in the midst of a storm, I mean, is there mutual aid that happens among those companies or with other communications providers?
So informally, yes. I would say if a particular, I mean, there are numerous instances where a generator has been loaned from one company to the other. There's been issues where fuel, say Charter has fuel and AT&T doesn't, or or another company. Yes, we've done that. We will do that. We recognize that. We're all interconnected, so it's in everybody's best interest to help one another during the event, before the event, and after the event, learn from the events as well.
I don't know, Scott, if you want to talk about sort of intra-sector collaboration in the power sector.
Sure. I'll do it as quickly as I can. I'll say it this way. So each segment of the sector, the investor-owns, the municipals, the cooperatives have their own mutual assistance networks, but we increasingly work together to make sure that we are supporting the communities that are without power. Maybe the best way to talk about the coordination that happens is to talk about some of the storms. You all have seen, Helene and Milton has been talked about a lot this morning. 50,000 workers from all across North America, 41 states in the District of Columbia, plus Canada, descended on the affected area to restore power. One of the ways that I simplify talking about our culture of mutual assistance is, and this really does oversimplify it, so you have to access the impacted area. That's sometimes easier said than done. You have to assess the damage, and then you get thousands of people to help restore power, and that is fixing transmission lines, fixing distribution lines, fixing anything else that might have gone wrong, and working with customers in the field, or working with critical customers in the field to make sure that we are starting with life-saving work, first responders, hospitals, things like that, getting to life-sustaining, things like grocery stores and other critical functions in the community, and then ultimately life-sustaining, or life-supporting rather, where we're just kind of getting to back to regular life. But like I said, what I just said in maybe a minute, depending on the severity of the damage, can take hours or it can take days. The other thing that I think is important to talk about is not just the unity of effort, all of the people that are coming to restore power from all across North America, but also that unity of message. And the reason I mention message, it's not reputational, it's to be able to communicate to customers. There's a really big difference between a 2-hour outage, a 2-day outage, and a 2-week outage. And so helping people understand what to expect. You would be surprised at how resilient the American people are as long as they know what to do. If they think it's going to be a 2-day outage, but it ultimately lasts a week, they're going to be angry. But if it's a 2-day outage and it lasts 18 hours, well, they felt really good about that because they were ready to deal with being without power for 2 days. The power got back on more quickly. Life is returning to normal. It may not be comfortable. It may not be ideal, but those basic life-saving, life-supporting, life-sustaining activities are being supported. So anyway, it's a culture of mutual assistance that has evolved over the last 140 years. It continues to evolve because expectations and needs evolve, but that's sort of how the electric power sector approaches mutual assistance and storm response in particular.
So we're coming up on the end of our time. So I think maybe what we'll do is just sort of go around the panel and if each of you could just share your thoughts in response to a fairly broad question, which is what advice do you have for communications providers, utilities, other stakeholders that are looking to create and grow, maybe some of the stakeholders that aren't as active in some of these cross-sector CISA-led, other state and local emergency management-led groups, how can they get involved and what can they do to make sure that they're well positioned for the next hurricane? And maybe I'll start with Sherry and then Tom, and then we can wrap up with the folks here in the room.
Yeah, thank you. I would say the one thing that I would advise any communications company or other utility that owns some kind of fiber is make sure your equipment is well labeled and well marked at all pole locations possible, because if we don't know who it is, it's going to be overlooked as unimportant. There was a lot of finger pointing during Michael on who caused what outage and why and when. It doesn't really matter at this point, but going forward, what you can do is make sure your cables are clearly marked, and that's true for a small company or a huge company. Knowing who it is allows someone in the field, no matter what background they are, why they're there, to understand the importance of what it is and that it's it's active, it's important, and it doesn't need to be damaged or broken because it could be 911 equipment that is out. Um, the other thing I would encourage is talk to those people before the event. I mean, we've talked about it all day long. Blue sky days are the days to be talking about what's important and why it's important and who to contact when it's out. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Sherry.
Hey, thank you. I guess just a few words of advice. One would be, and we've kind of hit on it, is, number one, it takes effort to build the relationships with utilities and emergency management offices. I mean, that, being a part of tabletop exercises with them, forming relationships, takes effort. And, I know at least with myself, we've got our own day jobs. And so that it does take a lot of extra effort to get those relationships and keep them. The other thing is that, just communicating during disasters is a recipe for maybe mistakes and not being as timely. So, making sure that you're communicating timely. And last thing is having formal roles in your emergency response plan. I know everybody's got formal roles for that, but having that include, who's going to be at the local utility office during a storm, who's going to be at the Emergency Management Association, having those roles and backups defined. And so to include that, not just your normal emergency response plan, but also communications with your partners is key. So I guess those are my 3 words of advice.
Thanks. Joe, you want to start?
Great. So I guess I have 3 things as well. You talked about the smaller providers and how they can be engaged. One of the things that we do with the Communication ISAC is all of the major trade associations, including ACA Connects, NTCA, we had their CEO on the panel this morning, NCTA, US Telecom, CTIA, they're all members of the Communication ISAC. So that's a conduit for the smaller providers. Secondly, in terms of advice I would give is make sure that your operational folks within the power companies and the comms companies are developing relationships at the street level, because that will be hugely, to Scott's point earlier, DC does not have all the right ideas or all the answers, and they don't have the screwdriver that gets down to the end. So totally agree with that, and making sure you have the right people with the right skill sets involved in those discussions. And I had a 3rd one, but I lost it, so I'm going to let it go. Thanks.
Thank you. My first recommendation, if you're not a member of the Comms ISAC, join the Comms ISAC. Make sure that you're on those calls, building those relationships, making sure that you're attending the ESF2 spring training that gets put on every year. That includes comms industry partners as well as government partners and communicators from all across the country and all levels of government, to include the SWICs, specifically talking about how to respond. If you haven't already done so, we also recommend that everybody goes and does PACE planning, right? So that you've planned for primary communications, alternate means of communications, contingency, and emergencies. As you heard from a state SWIC here earlier, you have to plan for not having communications or standard comms. If you don't already have shares, make sure that you have a form of HF radio, something that's really, resilient and you can likely use when regular comms are out. And then other than that, just, the exercise and planning. Can't hit that enough. Make sure that you're exercising, realistically exercising, so that when time comes, it isn't the first time that you're doing something.
So I just have one, seeing the red light that's blinking over there, that we're a little over time. We've heard a lot. I think every member of every panel so far has used the phrase blue sky, and the FEMA version is meet over coffee, not over crisis. I would just add a corollary to that, which is it's tempting to do that outreach, update your contact lists and say, yep, relationships outreach, done. That's crossed off my to-do list, but you are never done. It constantly needs to be refreshed. You need to get that new phone number. You need to get that new person in the office. You need to find the person who left. You need to have that sustained effort in order to not just establish, but to maintain your critical relationships.
So last and least, I will say, first of all, I echo everything that has just been said. The industry-government coordination is invaluable. The trades and the ISACs and the sector coordinating councils as force multipliers, the importance of doing things in blue sky days, don't waste a crisis. The other thing I would say, and this is kind of where I'll leave it, is this is an evolution. I mentioned going back to the 1880s and sort of how we did mutual assistance then, and certainly the system has evolved and so have the threats. From basically the 1940s till 2012, we did it one way, and in the last 10, 15 years, it's evolved beyond that because expectations are evolving, because the threats are evolving, because extreme weather is becoming more severe and more frequent, and because people are more reliant on the services that we all provide. So I think understanding that we are still, believe it or not, in early days of how we can continue to get better from a critical infrastructure partnership perspective is just worth saying. Industry to industry, industry to government, a lot of appreciation for people like Victor, and in EEI's case and the electric power sector's case, our sector risk management in the Department of Energy. We can't do this without government. They knock down barriers when bad days come. So getting involved in those industry partnerships, industry government partnerships, and if you're too small or you don't think you're important enough, certainly working through your trade associations. Can't emphasize that enough. And then the last thing I'd say, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank the FCC both for putting this on today and highlighting the value of these partnerships and helping solidify them even further than they have been, but also for granting EEI's petition recently on using text messages for demand response. Again, the ability to communicate with our customers so they know what to expect when these more challenging days arise. This goes to how valuable these partnerships, both again, industry and industry government, can be. So thank you.
Thanks. Well, oh, Joe?
I'm sorry, can I have one alibi? So I did remember the third one, and I think it's important. When we're in an emergency operations center, highly critical, highly important to put ESF2 comms and ESF12 together. That was my third one, and I just want to make a pitch for that hugely important to be able to have those two talking with one another, and not depending on, the telephone game, if you will, relaying information. And I'll also thank the FCC for having this. It's been very informative.
And just to foot stomp something that Joe just said, I love the sector coordinating councils. I love what we were able to do here in DC. Nothing trumps coordination at the EOC level, period.
Thanks to all our panelists. I can't think of a better note to end this on than appreciation for the FCC. So thanks, everybody. I'll turn things back to our MC.
Thanks, Leon, and our panel two panelists. I think we'll take another quick break if everyone will come back at around 12:10, and we'll keep it rolling. Thanks. 12:20. We'll get started. Alrighty, so I'm going to turn it over to George Donato to introduce the third panel. Thanks, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, this has been an amazing conversation that we've had in the first two panels. The first one, we've discussed the challenges that each industry faces in responding to and recovering from the outages after a hurricane. In the second panel, we delved into how different stakeholders are sharing resources and are working together to solve all these issues that they face, joint issues that they face. This panel is looking into the future, and we will be examining best practices, limitations, and ways power and communication sectors can learn from each other. And we're going to break this panel down into two sections. The first one will be for the preparation phase, and the second one will be for the recovery phase. So with us today, we have, I'm going to break tradition here, and I'm going to read the bios so we can save some voice here. But so we have Dennison Coomer, who serves as a statewide ESF2 communications lead for South Carolina and oversees the public safety and emergency communications section within the Department of Administration, with over 20 years of experience in first responder communications, RF engineering, disaster operations, and interoperability. Dennison is a recognized leader in emergency communication planning and response. He's a former radio technician. Dennison now manages statewide interoperability initiatives, training programs, and communications resilience. We have here Pat Hart, who is the Senior Director for Resilience Programs at the American Public Power Association, which represents community-owned electric utilities in 49 states and Puerto Rico. He's responsible for leading the safety, mutual aid, and risk management programs that support the association's 1,400 member utilities. Prior to joining APPA in 2023, Pat held senior positions at FEMA, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Energy, and Edison Electric Institute, and the Analysis and Resilience Center. We also have here Nicole Hutnett, who is the primary lead for the T-Mobile Emergency Response Program with more than 27 years of experience in the industry. In her role as a national advisor and ESF2 lead, Nicole has provided critical support on behalf of T-Mobile during a broad range of significant events, including responses to natural disasters, such as the 2025 Southern California wildfires, the 2024 Hurricane Helene, and 2023 Maui wildfires. In addition, she has supported several national special security events such as NATO, presidential inaugurations, the Republican and Democratic national conventions, and other special events such as the Super Bowl. With us today, we have Roger Lord, who is the statewide interoperability coordinator for the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Roger has worked for the Division of Emergency Management since 2019. His first event was Hurricane Dorian and included 2 out-of-state deployments. He serves as co-lead for ESF2 and manages tactical public safety response. With us today as well is Jeff Strassner, who is an engineer and vice president of distribution region operations for AEP Texas, located in Corpus Christi. He has been with the company for 42 years and lived along the Texas Gulf Coast for most of his career. He's been involved in several hurricane restoration efforts, including Hurricane Harvey in 2017 and Hurricane Beryl in 2024. Jeff McKnight currently serves as the Assistant Vice President of Network Services at AT&T, where he leads a dedicated team responsible for over 30% of the network, spanning wireless, wireline, and network disaster recovery. His team works to ensure the network remains robust and resilient, including overseeing AT&T's recovery asset portfolio. With 14 years at AT&T, Jeff's experience includes leading automation teams, driving network transformation, managing data centers, and overseeing AT&T's energy budget. With us today is also Kathleen Thompson, who is a Vice President, Regulatory and Legal Affairs at U.S. Telecom, the Broadband Association. In this role, Kathleen advocates for members on public safety, network resiliency, accessibility, and customer and consumer protection. Kathleen has also served as a deputy director of the NG 911 Institute, working with Congressional Next Gen 911 Caucus to promote the deployment of advanced and effective 911 services throughout the nation. So what a great panel we have here today. I'm going to direct my first question. There's so many questions I want to ask, but I'm going to direct my first one to Patrick, Nicole, both Jeffs, and Kathleen. We're going to have Patrick start. So what specific preparation-related best practices should communication providers and electric utilities adopt to complement one another's preparedness efforts?
Thanks, George. And before I answer that, I just want to say thank you to George, the whole FCC team, for the opportunity to participate today. We've talked a lot about, in the other panels, about partnership. Events like this really exemplifies that, so we do appreciate the partnership here and the opportunity to participate. One of the good things about going last in the third panel is that a lot of this has already been talked about, but we'll try to add a few more details here along the way. But it is, again, the blue sky, black sky situation, right? Working with your utilities to let them know where critical infrastructure is so they can build it into their restoration plans. Typically what utilities do, and I know Jeff can get into a little more detail on this, in those blue sky situations, they are developing their restoration plans. They're looking at what needs to be restored first. So that when an incident occurs, they have do their damage assessments. They overlay those damage assessments onto those restoration plans, identify which priority facilities are damaged or in those areas that have been affected, and they work to restore power to those facilities first. So the first thing I would say is just don't assume that they understand, as was already mentioned in other panels, that they understand where those facilities are. So work with them during those blue skies days, participate in tabletop exercises, other exercises that both industries hold, and then use those relationships in the black sky days. Coordinate in the EOC, as was already mentioned in other panels. The most effective way to do this is at the local level. So coordinate hand in hand that restoration effort so you can follow on once the poles are up. You can put your infrastructure on those poles as well, but doing that in a coordinated, step-by-step fashion aligned at that EOC is, to me, a best practice that should be followed. But I'll pause there and turn it over.
Yeah, thank you. There we go. All right, good morning. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today and highlighting the critical role that we all play in serving our communities together. Really, it takes a public-private partnership in taking care of these communities. Power and communications, in particular, addressing that question on best practices and how we can best work together. Power can greatly impact communications, and reciprocally, you need communications to be able to coordinate power restoration efforts. So it's essential that we're working together ahead of time. Joe, one of our industry partners, I heard him talk about sharing information ahead of the storm, not just addresses, but actually down to the circuits. When we're looking at switches and other areas that can impact an entire region, there could be an A and a B side. It's not just an address. It's actually sharing all of those details, working together ahead of time. Reciprocally, again, understanding and knowing that power plays a critical role in supporting our communities. So from a communications perspective, we need to be prepared to prioritize power during these events as well, understanding where those laydown yards are, where those substations yards are, so that as we are doing our network disaster recovery, we can surgically prioritize those locations supporting critical infrastructure in addition to our public safety and our communities. From a gray sky perspective, when that actual event happens, making sure that we are in those EOCs together, shoulder to shoulder, working together, sharing that information. Patrick, you shared during one of our initial discussions how important it is to actually be sitting there together, looking at those maps in person to understand where you are laying down poles today so that we can identify where that fiber is to help minimize some of those impacts to fiber during that restoration process. Following the Durrett show in Houston last year, where over 1 million were without power. Following Hurricane Beryl, where 2.78 million were without power at its peak. It was so important that, again, we were sitting shoulder to shoulder with those power providers, with ESF 12, working directly with CenterPoint to understand those priorities together. And then now we're exercising together. Just having recently attended their exercise, their full-scale exercise, and being integrated into that. These emergency operations centers can really help foster that role in bringing ESF 2 and 12 together. In addition to understanding where you're working and operating, I think it's also important to know what your plan is for the day so that we can prioritize our fueling missions. Hurricane Helene alone, we had over 800 generators that were in operation. You can understand the massive refueling efforts that this was. So instead of focusing our efforts in this area, that power may be restored in the next few hours, we could be focusing our efforts into this area. So again, that information share really helps us together be able to serve our communities better.
Jeff McKnight.
Yeah, I would say the best practices from black sky days are what benefits you in blue sky days, right? So it's learning what you've learned from those events and proactively enabling your folks to go solve those problems before the next black sky event. What worked well, what didn't, right? And then making the connections, making those processes better with those power companies or whoever we're working with to ensure that the next time we go into that area, that's a solid relationship if it was an area where we struggled that particular time. I'd also say we're talking about storm prep, but there's also proactive and reactive storms, right? Hurricane, we can work 7, 8, 10 days before and start working with power companies, working with the local EOCs, but it's the reactive ones where you really benefit from those relationships that you build during those blue sky days.
And we're talking about tornadoes and whatnot.
Wildfires in California, tornadoes, ice storms in Michigan. You know, storm season is not just hurricane season for us anymore. It's 365 days a year. There's always an event going on that's impacting a local community somewhere.
That's a really good point. Jeff Straisner?
Yeah, so from an operations standpoint, for me, it's important to know what it is and where it is that I need to fix. And so identifying those ahead of time, that critical infrastructure. We learned in Texas in 2021 during Winter Storm Uri that power was interrupted to a number of gas pipeline compressor stations that stopped the flow of gas to the generating plants. Same thing can happen on a communication standpoint. We don't want to be the cause of interrupting communications because we've evolved over my 42 years of career with going from pushing paper to using our phones. Everything's done electronically. You know, and at the end of the day, we got to win the communication war when it comes to service restoration. And I don't mean, you know, getting Netflix back up so I can stream Peaky Blinders. I'm talking about being able to communicate within my team, within the local community, within our state and federal. So getting that story out ahead of time, getting a complete story, like Scott said earlier, letting folks know, is this a 2-hour storm, 2-day storm, or 2-week storm? And I'll challenge that we probably can't get by with any more 2-week storms. You know, this is a society of immediate gratification. They want response now, and they want return to normal life as soon as possible. So we need to learn from that. We need to win the communication storm. We need to get battle. We need to get the infrastructure back in place so we can communicate.
And Kathleen?
Hi, everybody. I want to echo everyone's thanks of the FCC and Chairman Carr for having the roundtable and having all of us here today. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the lighter lift things that I think have a great benefit without too much work going into it. And as part of my role at US Telecom, I'm on the cross-sector resiliency forum leadership team, and there's a few things that we do. One is the local contact information. I know that's come up on the other panels, but we really try to make sure that we are regularly sending out the spreadsheet to as many people as we can and then getting those updates back. So you're not relying on people to actively tell you that someone has changed jobs. You send it out and then they note, like, this was reviewed on this day. So keeping that updated just proactively is a huge thing. And then similarly, the cross-sector resiliency forum meets at a standard, there's a standard schedule that we meet regardless of what has happened. And we talk about successful practices. I think Steve mentioned that on the first panel. And having those kind of just regular, almost administrative things in place can help you a lot when disaster actually happens. So I'll be brief and stop there.
So let me have a follow-up question. I'm going to direct these to Nicole Hudnett and to Jeff McKnight, but invite anyone who wants to join in as well to do so. Are there any frameworks or processes that work particularly well to address known common issues that arise during discovery? And as a follow-up, are there any lessons learned from the preparation for Hurricanes Helene and Milton? Or other events that aided in response to that you can share?
There's a lot of great processes and frameworks that are in place today. We've talked a lot about that blue sky coordination, how important it is to have that public-private partnership, bringing those private industry stakeholders together in regular communication, coordination with each other. You have several private stakeholders in the room today that have a national presence. So we respond to a variety of disasters 365 days a year, as you pointed out, and can share valuable lessons learned. We have we're part of several different working groups at the federal level. We have the COM-ISAC with the representation on that. We also are part of the regional FEMA emergency communications working groups in each of the regions that have representation from federal, from FEMA, CISA, FCC, along with our state and local stakeholders and private industry. Several states have their own working groups. We're on the panel with two of them right here. Dennis and Coomer has a fabulous working group. In the room here, we have Gabe and Greg, again, that have great working groups for North Carolina, South Carolina, the CCG in Texas, the commercial carrier groups. In Louisiana, the CCG that was stood up following Hurricane Ida, from lessons learned there. And again, having those stakeholders in the room together, that was one of the lessons learned. And now we meet regularly on Blue Sky to talk about each one of those things. Solving problems ahead of time before they happen. Just recently, the Houston Supply Chain Working Group. Again, private stakeholders along with city and local stakeholders meeting together to collaborate and talk about those pain points. We're able to discuss some of the access issues that supply chain was having when they're bringing contractors into the area. So we were able to share lessons learned from our experience in bringing contractors into areas and be able to establish a process ahead of time now before that next event occurs. Louisiana, that CCG, our regular meeting, our regular working group, met again just recently in person in Louisiana and walked through a hurricane exercise with FEMA, CISA, with our private industry and our local stakeholders there in Louisiana, fostered at GOSEP, and went through those access issues, went through the issues we have with fiber cuts and how do we get that public messaging out. So it's really important to duplicate these across the country and establish these frameworks ahead of time. Building trust is so important, knowing that what you can expect of your private stakeholders and what we can expect of our government officials and our public stakeholders, so that when we go into these EOCs, we have that already established and you know what we can expect of each other and how we can help our communities together.
I would say back to the prep. Our FirstNet Response Operation Group works continually year-round in building the local relationships at the local and state levels for the EOCs. So when these events do come up, we know where they're going to be staged. We know who's in charge. We know who the contacts are. And so that makes coordination of where we're going much, much easier. I would also say, as lessons learned from Helene and Milton, our friend from North Carolina that sat up here a little while ago, during Helene, they turned up a phone number that you could call and get directions on where to go, because in those mountain areas and up in Asheville and those areas, it was very hard to navigate how to get to a location because so many roads and rivers were washed out, and that access was invaluable for us as well during that time. So that was something that worked really well.
And it speeds up the recovery process.
Absolutely, because instead of taking a 4-hour route around a mountain, there might be an hour route another way that we didn't know about, wouldn't pick up on GPS because you just didn't know what was in service and what wasn't.
Roger, I think you have your hand up.
I do, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. The biggest thing that's been stressed already is the relationships. Having those relationships ahead of time, doing the meetings on the blue sky with leadership, having conversations with each and every one of the partners while we're in friendly terms. The best thing that happens is we turn to a gray sky mode for me, and we just start acting. We execute the plans that we have. We continue to work. But I want to be 2 phone calls away, and already knowing how to make those 2 phone calls happen is huge for me. So that's my 2 thoughts.
And Dennison?
Thank you, George, and thanks again, all the panelists and the FCC for putting this on. 2 things from a framework perspective. Helene taught us, and I think some of the panelists spoke about this earlier this morning, but there's a lack of status clarity on downed infrastructure, especially tangled or storm impacted lines. So those kinds of things, of course, delay repairs significantly. And we had several instances where crews couldn't confirm if lines were energized, or these repaired lines were temporary, or if they were actually active, if they were accidentally damaged. So early on, we established a kind of standard for marking communication lines and power lines that were entangled in debris to let folks know. And if we could establish something that was standard and shared across the industry partners, I think that would go a long way for any type of future responses. And then in my cohort, Greg mentioned this morning that throwing fiber optic cable or communication supplies from an aircraft may be frowned upon, but what works really good are communication technicians that are hoist qualified on airframes. So one of the things that our state did several years ago is working with our state task force members, our urban search and rescue teams, building at the time were swiftwater rescue personnel, qualified communications technicians designed to ensure air-to-ground communications during rescues. We were then able to leverage those individuals during Helene and other emergencies like recent wildfires to get certified credentialed communications technicians safely in the areas where roads no longer existed, to make sure that we were able to keep generators running and those systems operational.
Excellent.
Hey, George, could I add just one more point? Something else that does work is the incident command system, putting together an emergency response team. And if you don't use that within your organization for emergency response, I highly encourage you to do that. Chasing down one of my guys in their truck on the street might get you somebody's attention immediately, but it's not going to solve your problem as quickly as you working through the liaison group. They lets our planning group know where we got a problem. They come to my operations team and we go fix it. So I highly put a plug in for the IMT and the ICS.
Thank you. Shifting now to, this is the FCC, so we have to ask questions. At least one question is very heavy on telecom. So I'm going to direct this to Jeff McKnight and Nicole Hudnett. How has the Mandatory Disaster Response Initiative, also known as NDRI, and your efforts to set up roaming under disaster arrangements in advance factored into your network resiliency preparations? And as a follow-up, how do your efforts to provide mutual aid, enhance municipal preparedness, increase consumer readiness, and improve public awareness play into your preparation efforts? And I'll let Jeff take this one initially.
I would say that most of the efforts under the MDRI are going on right when the events start. So once we've triaged our networks or T-Mobile's triaged theirs, those phone calls are already going back and forth that says, hey, can you help me here? Can I roam here? And so I think there's very good partnership at that level already. And we'll continue to do that. You know, you think of things outside of maybe just MDRI. We had an incident last week in Missouri where another provider had a central office that was burned to the ground. And within 36 hours, we had disaster equipment up there for them, allowing them to restore as well. So we're always partnering with the different providers in any way we can, almost at minute zero.
To echo that, you know, it was said earlier that being prepared for disasters and supporting our customers and our commitment to resiliency is really in our DNA as a provider. We understand that communication is a lifeline in our communities. And so, you know, we care about connecting our customers. And to do this, we conduct continuous planning and exercising with our federal, state, and local partners, as well as our utilities and our roaming partners. To your point, Jeff, we were already doing this. And still continue to do it with the Midri. We stand ready to support any requests that come in, and informally, we are already doing this today, from generators to fuel to supporting roaming requests.
That's excellent to hear. Now, I want to bring in Jeff Straisner, Roger Lord, and Dennis and Coomer for the next question. What high priority or critical changes to current practices, or what new practices, if any, do you think are necessary for disaster preparation? And we'll start with Jeff, if you don't mind.
Okay. Again, I need to know what needs to be fixed. So identifying those critical components, just as we've done in the natural gas pipeline system, I need to know those critical components in the telecom system. And I think we beat that horse quite a bit here this morning, but you need to know. So that's something we need to work on. Again, that having those local contacts, you know, it's great to have the connections back through the federal level and through the trade association group, but knowing in the heat of battle, you know, who we need to reach out to when something's brought to our attention, and knowing we can go to the local EOC and figure out who that is versus me thumbing through my phone, assuming it works, you know, trying to find them. So those two are critical things.
Excellent. And Dennison?
Yeah, sure. So to echo Jeff's point, if I had one thing to share with our service providers from the state level, we can't fix problems that we don't know exist either. So it's a two-way street. I think everybody after Helene noticed that there's some probably honest conversations that needed to be had about some transparency gaps, especially between the two sectors. You know, on the power side, ESF2 and ESF12 here in our State Emergency Operations Center are 3 feet from each other. So I can tell you how many customers are out by county, by provider in real time. We have that information pulled into our common operating platform. I can quickly go over and speak to a field coordinator from a co-op and look at an outage map and see where their restoration crews are as they're working in and pushing into different parts of the state. But that same clarity is not always available from the communications sector. And I think Mr. Hauser touched on it earlier this morning that, you know, we're not often asking for what many people fear that we are. You know, we're not looking for proprietary GIS data, but during an emergency, having to track down certain information does slow down the coordinated response. I think this morning, a lot of us have discussed kind of how the industry partners have progressed in recent years and building and developing that trust that is needed to help kind of combat this issue. But I think we all can do better and can improve over time.
And Roger?
So I think from my side, when I took over in 21, the ESF2 co-lead and SWIC position, everybody told me the worst thing everybody's going to complain about is communications after a disaster. And, you know, we really hadn't had a hurricane at that point since Hurricane Michael, so Hurricane Ian happened, and one of the things that had been talked about in the state was moving to strike team mentality. Instead of attaching COM-Ls and COM-Ts to IMT teams, we moved to a strike team mentality. And what that gives us is the ability to be fast thinking. So as soon as USAR is mounting up to ride in, as soon as winds die down, we're sending communication strike teams in to figure out what's going on. We're not waiting for counties or for municipalities to tell us what their issues are. We're already scanning the air, figuring out what their issues are, knowing what they had before and what they don't have now. Those have been huge industry or huge changes for us that have helped us get ahead of the issues because we know what they are. It goes back to, if we're not told what the issues are, then we can't fix the issues. Finding out 3-4 days later that a tower fell down because a county doesn't want to have the hard conversation. When we have tools in place that are 2 counties over that and teams waiting to work. But it's having those hard conversations. It's using my local liaisons. It's being much like Denison is with our ESF 12. We literally share a wall with them. So we're always in conversation with them. We're seeing them as we're passing in and out during events. It's working with Nicole and her team from T-Mobile and AT&T and FirstNet and Verizon. It's just maintaining those constant dialogues during the events that let us be successful. And where things are going to fall through the cracks, but it's when we find them, how fast can we address that issue?
Kathleen, you also have, you would like to chime in?
Yes, yeah. So this is just quick. Another light lift suggestion is just the FCC has their debris clearing notice that came out in the spring, and I think ensuring really wide distribution of that notice can help a lot, making sure the people at the local level have that, it's on their mind, because it can really help avoiding fiber cuts and cuts to other important wires.
Sure.
Hey, George?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to circle back again. Hey, when the strike teams were mentioned, that reminded me of something else, too. Another value in knowing those critical sites up front is we're also taking a find and fix approach. I mean, Patrick talked about assessment, and we certainly do assessment, but assessment can take hours, if not days, depending on the severity of a storm. So if we know those critical locations ahead of time, and we've got people assigned to circuits as they do a find and fix approach, there's a good chance we can get those things back on prior to what we would have if we completed the entire assessment.
So I see the consistency here, the message that we need to get everything planned, accordingly, and identify those key infrastructures. Before we hop off, the recovery, the preparation part, and we start with the recovery, I want to ask one last question about this, about preparation. And I'm going to ask Patrick, Jeff McKnight, and Nicole to chime in here. What advice do you have for emergency managers looking to take action to prepare for hurricanes? And we will start with Patrick.
I'll go ahead and start. So as already mentioned, obviously we're a month into hurricane season. We did have some members of the media reach out to APPA to sort of talk to us about, how we started to prepare for this hurricane season, anything different. And our answer to them is that the start of our preparedness action took place during last hurricane season. We would have daily calls when activated to identify any impediments to the restoration process. We have these calls with our mutual aid coordinators in each of the states. They tell us how the restoration is going, outage numbers, where there are problems, what issues need to be addressed. We then get on the phone with our partners at EEI and NRECA, with DOE, in the role as the ESF 12 rep in the National Response Coordination Center at FEMA. So basically, as we go through that process, we are identifying limiting factors, issues that are taking place during the restoration, and we compile those, discuss those in a quick after action after the storms. And then last December, what we did was we got our state coordinators together in Atlanta, Georgia, and did a hot wash just for hurricane season. Went through all of those impediments that we saw, identified action items to address those issues, and began working on them right away. So again, our preparation, I guess the one thing I would say is that there's never really a stop and start to that process. You're always in that, looking for ways to improve, to get better, and that's exactly what we did with hurricane season last year.
Nicole?
Again, just echoing and highlighting that need for coordination and collaboration and preparation and planning together ahead of the storm, and then when that event happens, bringing us into those emergency operations centers to work alongside you, to understand what those priorities are in your community. We talk about needing to understand where public safety is operating, standing up unified command posts or incident command posts, which hospitals are taking surges of patients, where those reunification sites are, what those priorities are for our other stakeholders, for power, for other critical infrastructure. So much of that collaboration is done in emergency operations centers, shoulder to shoulder, versus sending text and calls, trying to get that information so that we can prioritize it. So ahead of hurricane season, really encouraging those ESF2 and our emergency operations centers to provide a forum and a seat for us to work alongside each other during these events. Also planning for the worst case scenario. We have to plan for that worst case scenario. It's not a matter of if, it's when. Having a PACE communication plan, this was talked about in an earlier panel, a primary, alternate, contingent, and emergency communications plans. There may be disruptions, there may be degradation in service, so you must have a plan. That primary plan, and go through each one of those steps. Practice those plans, exercise those plans, and make sure that you're going through each one of those cycles so that becomes muscle memory for when that event actually occurs. CISA's website has a lot of great information too on how to develop a PACE communications plan. And again, encourage all of the emergency operations centers and our public safety folks to bring these stakeholders into your exercises, having us be part of those tabletop and full-scale exercises again to work on these things ahead of a storm.
I think exercise and practice the PACE plans is spot on. I would also tell you that if you deal with areas along the Gulf and Florida and stuff that are used to these storms, those are very well thought out, well documented procedures. But if you're an emergency management center in a smaller municipality, an event's coming to you. It's just a matter of when. And so don't think that it's not going to hit you, and be prepared for that. And then the quicker the local municipalities and emergency management centers and even the states can reach back out to us and tell us, hey, our reunification center is going to be here. If I go back to the California wildfires, they put thousands and thousands and thousands of people in very small areas for reunification. And it was quickly realized that they were saturating a lot of capacity in a very small area. And so the quicker we know about those areas, the quicker we can respond where it's never even noticed by the users.
Excellent. So let's turn our conversation now to recovery. And my first question related to recovery, I'm going to ask Dennison Coomer, Roger Lord, and Jeff McKnight to chime in. The 2024 hurricane season saw back-to-back impacts from hurricanes Helene and Milton, leading to enormous amounts of displaced sand, erosion, and leading to challenging storm surge impacts, necessitating a long cleanup period. Are there any lessons learned related to managing an ongoing and lengthy recovery effort that communications and power providers can use to help them prepare for recovery?
Yeah, I'll take it first. When we go to a recovery, our intention is to be self-sustaining for whether it's 2 days, 5 days, 10 days. We bring in our own shower trailers, bunkhouses, kitchen trailers, along with all the assets to restore the network. And our intention there is to not be a drain on the community until the community's ready for us to participate. So once that community gets back on its feet, say in Helene, we're then utilizing the resources, buying food from the local community, using hotel rooms where we can. So that what I would tell you is the first step in recovery for us. Also, we use our AT&T Weather Operations Center. So we have a team of licensed meteorologists and hydrologists that are also giving us data ahead of time on sites that should be impacted, where we can expect this kind of damage. So it helps us focus that recovery. So when we get there, we know these areas are where we need to go first to get that most crucial communications back up.
Dennison?
Yep. So one of the big takeaways that we had to kind of adapt for during Helene, specifically, these aren't 48-hour events anymore. Long recoveries demand, the second phase of planning, fresh personnel and crews to bring in, completely different new logistics chains, and then the sustained attention to maintain those resources and communication systems throughout the entire recovery process. Communicating expected restoration timelines coming from those providers to their customers help, but we also rely on clear updates internally so that we can help allocate limited resources. The more clarity that we have about what's happening, where it's happening, and when, the better we can help prioritize our support from the beginning throughout the entire recovery and response process.
Roger?
I think from my side, it was the three storms, because we'll include Debbie in this, because we went Debbie, then Helene, and then Milton. When Helene happened, we wrapped up pretty fast here in the state, and we turned our focus to people around us, our surrounding states, Greg in North Carolina, Tennessee, and what can we help them, because we had a pretty good handle on what things were here in the state. From there, it's just how can we continue operationally with the personnel we have. How can we make sure people get rest? How can we keep them healthy and keep them in the field, and turn them back in around, so where we can continue to do this in case something else happened again? And that was the big thing. It was just what are we going to do next, and managing that was where we were. And it worked really well. We got to rest after hurricane season, and we'll continue to do that.
Add one more point. I think the other thing that was key too is Helene was, for us, was turning into Milton, right? It's reassuring our local EOCs in North Carolina and stuff, we're still there. We're not leaving to go to Florida. We are leaving the assets and the people here to restore this while we go focus on that other one too. So they knew, hey, we're not just leaving you high and dry and going to the next one. We're here for the long term.
That's an excellent message to send to people who are just going through such a horrific situation. Okay, so I'm going to direct this question to Jeff Strassner. What specific practices that utilities should adopt that complement communication providers' recovery efforts?
One of the things we need to do a better job is onboarding our folks that are coming in from off the system about not cutting fiber, right? We probably do a decent job. Like Southern Company, we have some of our own fiber, and hopefully we have it tagged properly. Probably do a decent job of shying them away from that, but we need to do a better job of counseling them, coaching them, onboarding them about not cutting any fiber. We've got to balance that with the safety need, right? If a person is assigned to a job and there's a spaghetti web wrapped around the pole and they got to try to figure out how to safely do it, we need more education. So asking the telecoms to help educate the first responders, local communities better, the utilities doing a better job of educating the first responders about our own wires down, and then doing a better job of onboarding folks that come to assist us about what can and cannot be cut.
And Nicole, I'm going to direct this question to you. Similarly, what best practices should communication providers employ?
We talked about emergency managers and public safety having that worst case scenario plan. So it's important for us to always be planning too for that worst case scenario. Again, I repeat, it's not a matter of if, it's when. We're seeing an increase in the intensity and the frequency of these disasters. We're seeing things in areas that we didn't traditionally have. Texas had its first PSPS event, wildfires in Louisiana. So making sure that we have a plan to respond to all of these and a deep level of commitment to resiliency, going into the hardening of our networks, putting funding into disasters, investing in things like telemetry, adding more equipment to be able to respond, and also adding equipment like hybrid generators so that we can have longer fuel time or run times on our generators. So just having that ongoing commitment to resiliency.
Thank you. There
Oh,
is.
George, there's a comment online.
Oh, sorry. Kathleen, please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, so I just will echo a little bit of what Nicole said, but yeah, some of what I've heard from our members is having your equipment ready to go. So like your fleet of deployable assets, to the extent that you're able to have that, having that ready to go. If you have anything that can be battery operated, that type of stuff can be so helpful to complement the utilities, because then you can be online even where there is not power. So that's just some of the things that I've heard from our members that are helpful during the disaster.
Thank you. So I'm going to direct this question to Dennison, Nicole, and Jeff McKnight, inviting everyone to step in and also share their thoughts. But are there ways for public safety agencies to better facilitate energy and communications recovery?
I can take that one first, George. So I think it's been mentioned a lot today, but it truly does start with the relationships. If you want to assign, whether it's a liaison from the utility energy side or communications to an EOC, you need to know who they are ahead of time, of course. You need to bring them into the planning process. Have them take the ICS courses, as Jeff mentioned, I believe. Teach them how your EOC operates. Put them to work during planned events, regular scheduled festivals and things like that, and exercises, so that when it comes time to do it during an emergency, it's not a shock. Also, instead of fuel escorts or late stage improvising, let's share information about route statuses, fuel availability, obstacle reports proactively. For road closed, say so. If it's a substation that's in trouble, speak up. Transparency does go both ways. Ask for what you need for, even if the answer might be no, because if you don't ever ask, the answer is always going to already be no.
Yeah, I would go back to what I said earlier. For us, our FirstNet operations section chiefs work day in and day out within their FEMA regions with the local EOCs of the states, the municipalities. They're there building those relationships. So in the time of need, those relationships are there and they're built, and we can rely on those to get the information we need. So it's a lot of that blue sky day planning of coordination.
And echoing that same sentiment there, it's really important that we are collaborating on that Blue Sky Day, developing those relationships, encouraging our emergency operations centers to bring these stakeholders in, and working together to restore these communities. Dennison, you just talked about those obstacle reports, and we saw in North Carolina. Jeff, you talked about it too. Washouts and landslides don't always keep up with the mapping tools. So having that hotline stood up for us to get that turn-by-turn directions, so when we're sending technicians into these areas, we can get in there quicker to restore that communication. Being inside these EOCs, again, to work with our other stakeholders in the community, understanding those priorities, so that we are solving these problems together. We've seen this happen time and time again in disasters where that in-person collaboration made a difference.
Thank you. Now I'm going to open this one up to the entire panel. Do you have a message for the public about what you believe their expectations should be for the restoration of communications and power during and after a disaster? I think we've discussed this a bit. It's hard to say at times, how fast we can get this up and running. And you also brought up a really good point where, expectations are really, Jeff brought up a good point where expectations are really demanding that, I think it was instant gratification, almost the word that was brought up. So what message do you have for the public for when these things happen?
Yes, I'll start it off. I mean, we all need our own personal plan, right? We talked about plans as an industry and as about a company, but we all need our own personal plans because things are going to happen. You're going to lose communication. You're going to lose power. So know what you and your family are going to do when you do that. Rest assured that the industry recognizes the need to respond quickly and safely, and we're jointly working together in forums like this to continue to get better.
Again, I would say that, there may be disruptions, there may be degradations in service, but be rest assured and understand that we do know how critical communication is to public safety, to our critical infrastructure, and to our citizens to be able to connect to loved ones or to call 911. So we are working diligently to restore connectivity. We are working and coordinating with those government officials and with those other private stakeholders to restore quickly as possible. It's important to have that personal plan. That PACE plan, you can implement that at home. And down to the point of where you would meet up if something were to happen and you were to lose communication. So it's important to have a communication for your own home as well, along with our businesses and our public safety. There's a lot of information out there. FEMA's website has some great information on preparedness tips and communication tips. And us as a provider, we also put out tips on communications.
Yeah, I was going to mention ready.gov on FEMA's website has incredible amount of information that families can use to build their own family plan, getting ready for hurricane season or any type of incident. I will tell you, just to, we tell, or our members tell, even the critical infrastructure partners that you should have a plan to be on your own for 72 hours while we are actually repairing the grid and getting that power restored to you. So we are messaging that even to our critical consumers, but I would also, encourage the public to go to ready.gov, put together that plan. The other thing I would say too, and this is maybe something I could have mentioned in the last question, but telling the public to really listen to the messages about evacuations and when to return home. I know the states have done, in particular, Florida has done a really good job of this, letting folks know when not to return. By getting back on the roads and returning home, you can actually delay the response because you're blocking up roads that the line trucks can't use to get to the impacted areas. So, we've worked really closely with governor's offices in particular in Florida to get that message out to the public to know when to return and when not to return.
I would add this is the primary reason why AT&T's invested over $1 billion in our disaster recovery, is because when you go out there, and I've been to just about every event since I've had this team, when you see the look on people's faces when you get that connectivity back for them, it hits you deep. And so we're out there. At the moment it's safe for our teams to be out there, we're all out there trying to restore that service as fast as we can because we know the criticality it means, not just to the first responders, but to the community that's impacted as well and the family members that they need to call or they need to text. And so it's vitally important that they know we're out there as fast as we can for them.
Agreed. So one last question. We have 2 minutes to go. So can artificial intelligence be used by emergency management officials and operators to help in preparedness or in response? And if yes, how so? And I'm going to open it up to anyone and everyone in the panel.
I'll take it first. I mean, one way we can use it, and we're using it, is for refueling. We can take information from our generators, funnel it into routes, and know when we have to go refuel a generator instead of on a day-by-day basis or every other day. So you're using that to build the routes, build the timing, and we can be more efficient with our crews, making sure that those towers never lose the fuel that they need to stay up.
One thing that we're looking at right now, we have a wildfire project that we're working with the Department of Energy and the National Labs on. One thing we're exploring as a possibility is using AI to develop mitigation plans for wildfire. Now, obviously, that would not be your final plan, but it gives you that 60, 70% job done, getting that first draft done, that you would need to go back, correct, add some things too, but using that as a starting point for some of your restoration plans or mitigation plans. So that's something that we're exploring. We don't really have an answer on that yet, but it's something to consider.
All right. As emergency managers are using AI more and more, from wildfire detection to predicting and detecting hazards, similarly, we're using AI in our networks. We're building smarter networks that react faster. Our T-Mobile enhanced self-organizing network, SON technology, uses real-time data and AI to detect issues and adapt automatically. Self-healing and closing in those coverage gaps. By doing this, it's providing more reliable connectivity before, during, and after the storm. It also helps us in our response, because rather than sending teams out to the entire area, we're able to better direct those resources to where the need is greater.
And I just want to, before we end, I just want to thank the panelists for their time and their contributions to this subject, to this topic. It has been a really an amazing conversation. So I want to thank everyone. And now I will turn it over to our MC, Josh Garrett.
Don't clap for me, clap for the panelists. This has been a really great, I've had a great day, and I'm really thankful for George, panel 3, all our panelists all day, for bringing all your experience and expertise to this. So one more round of applause. And I know we're over time for the day, but I will invite the Public Safety Acting Chief, Zenji, up to have quick farewell remarks for us. Thanks.
As we close the roundtable, I wanted to sincerely thank our panelists. This has just been absolutely fantastic. All the panels have been great, and those who participated online as well. Your perspectives really helped shine a light on the complexities that we face and the opportunities that we share as we look at these storms. So really, the bottom line for me was communications, or the conversation here underscored the fact that power, communications, and emergency management services are not like separate systems. They are independent lifelines. When a disaster strikes, the power recovery depends on how well communications is active, as well as vice versa. And I think that really it really requires this kind of, as we had mentioned, coordination at all levels of government. At the end of the day, safety starts at home. It's hard to feel safe when the lights are out and the phones are down, and just that help feels out of reach for some people. And that's why this resilient infrastructure and what we're doing today is not just a technical issue, as I started off today with, but it's also a human one. And as we're looking at these storms, I just want to make sure that we can continue this momentum and this dialogue. I think it's just been really fantastic and a lot to build on. And a lot for us, the FCC, to think about of how we can help support power and telecom going forward on these issues. Again, thank you all for making this possible, and just our deepest gratitude for your time and your insightful comments today. So a big round of applause to you all. Thank you. That concludes our event.